What would you do if helping a stranger cost you everything? Marcus Reed had 15 minutes to save his future, a job interview that would finally lift his daughter out of poverty and silence his mother's disappointment. But when he saw her standing beside that broken-down Mercedes on an empty road, time stopped. She was terrified, alone. He knew what stopping meant. He knew what he'd lose. Yet his hands were already reaching for his toolbox. Sometimes the choice that destroys your life is the same choice that reveals who you really are. This is the story of the man who chose a stranger over salvation and discovered that kindness has a memory longer than regret. Before we begin, if you enjoy stories about ordinary people facing impossible choices, please hit that like button and comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. Your support means everything. Now, let's begin. The dashboard clock glowed 7:47 a.m. when Marcus Reed's hand trembled over the ignition key. 13 minutes. That's all he had left to cross 8 miles of industrial corridor and arrive at Harland Engineering with enough time to catch his breath, straighten his borrowed tie, and convince someone, anyone, that he deserved a second chance at a life he'd barely started to lose. His 2003 Honda Civic coughed to life, the engine rattling with the same exhaustion that lived in Marcus's bones. The inspection sticker in the corner of his windshield had expired 3 months ago, but paying the $70 fine meant Ava wouldn't get new shoes this month, and her current ones already had cardboard stuffed in the soles. Some choices weren't really choices at all. Marcus pulled out of the crumbling apartment complex parking lot, his daughter's goodbye still echoing in his ears. "Good luck, Daddy," she'd whispered, pressing her small palm against his cheek the way she always did when she sensed his fear. At 8 years old, Ava had learned to read the tremors in her father's voice, the tightness around his eyes that appeared when the bills came, or when his mother called with another lecture about responsibility and wasted potential. The morning sun cut harsh across the windshield as Marcus accelerated down Riverside Drive, past the shuttered factories and abandoned warehouses that lined this forgotten stretch of the city. This area had once thrived. His father had worked in one of these plants for 30 years before the layoffs came. Now it was just rust and silence, a graveyard of American manufacturing where weeds pushed through cracked concrete and graffiti artists practiced their craft on walls nobody cared about anymore. Marcus's phone buzzed in the cup holder. He didn't need to look to know it was his mother checking in, probably with another reminder that this interview was his last realistic shot at respectability. Eleanor Reed had a gift for stating the obvious as though it were profound wisdom, and Marcus had learned years ago that responding only encouraged longer sermons. The interview invitation had arrived 2 weeks earlier, forwarded through a connection Marcus had almost forgotten, a former classmate from his brief, bright semester at State Technical College before everything fell apart. Before Sarah's diagnosis. Before the medical bills that swallowed their savings like a black hole swallows light. Before the funeral that took place on an October afternoon so perfect it felt like mockery. Marcus gripped the steering wheel tighter, pushing those memories back into the compartment where he kept all the things that could make him cry in public. Today wasn't about grief. Today was about salvation. Harland Engineering. The name itself sounded like salvation. Solid, established, the kind of company that offered actual benefits and retirement plans instead of cash under-the-table wages that disappeared the moment you needed a sick day. The position was entry-level, something Marcus could have qualified for in his sleep back when he was 22, and full of ideas about what his life would become. At 35, with a resume full of gaps and construction work, he'd been stunned when they called. "We were impressed by your technical school transcripts," the HR woman had said, her voice professionally pleasant. "And your supervisor from Morrison Construction spoke very highly of your problem-solving skills. We'd like to speak with you about our junior engineering position." Marcus had thanked her 3 times in 30 seconds, his voice cracking with undignified hope. The dashboard clock clicked to 7:51, 12 minutes. The Route 40 overpass appeared ahead, its concrete pillars streaked with decades of exhaust residue. Marcus pressed the accelerator, feeling the Civic shudder with the effort. He'd changed the oil himself last week in the apartment parking lot, lying on cardboard while Ava held the flashlight and asked him to explain what each part did. She had her mother's curiosity, that hunger to understand how things worked beneath the surface. "Daddy, why don't you do engineering anymore?" she'd asked while he'd wiped grease from his hands. "Because life got complicated, sweetheart," he'd answered, which was both entirely true and completely insufficient. The truth was more painful than complicated. The truth was that Sarah's cancer had appeared in their third year of marriage, right when Marcus had 2 semesters left before his degree. The truth was that insurance didn't cover experimental treatments, and hope was expensive. The truth was that Marcus had made a choice, school or his wife's fighting chance, and he'd chosen love. He'd choose it again. He'd choose it 1,000 times, but that didn't make the consequences any less permanent. His phone buzzed again. This time, Marcus glanced down long enough to see his mother's name. He let it ring through to voicemail. Eleanor would want to hear that he'd arrived early, that he'd impressed them with his punctuality and preparedness. She'd want to believe that her son might finally become the man his father had been, steady, employed, respectable. She'd want to stop worrying that Marcus's choices had doomed both him and her only grandchild to a life of struggle. The industrial corridor stretched ahead, a tunnel of chain-link fences and corrugated metal buildings. Morning shift workers dotted the sidewalks, lunch pails in hand, heading toward jobs that paid just enough to keep the lights on. Marcus had joined their ranks 4 years ago, when the funeral expenses were finally paid, and he'd needed to start rebuilding something resembling a life. Construction paid better than retail, and his technical school background meant he could read blueprints and occasionally impress a foreman with his understanding of load-bearing calculations. But his body was already showing the strain. His lower back ached constantly now, a dull throb that sharpened whenever he lifted rebar or hauled concrete. His hands bore scars from a dozen small injuries, cuts, burns, a finger that had been partially crushed and hadn't quite healed right. This wasn't sustainable. This wasn't a future. This was survival. And survival had an expiration date. The dashboard clock read 7:53 when Marcus saw the Mercedes. At first, it was just a shape on the shoulder ahead, dark blue paint catching the morning light, hazard lights blinking weakly. Marcus's foot eased off the accelerator instinctively. The car looked expensive, new, completely out of place on this stretch of industrial wasteland. As he drew closer, he saw the woman. She stood beside the open hood, one hand pressed to her forehead, the other holding a phone. Even from a distance, Marcus could read the body language of defeat, shoulders curled inward, head tilted in frustration or fear. She wore a tailored suit, her dark hair pulled back severely, and she looked as out of place as her car in this landscape of rust and decay. Marcus's heart began a slow, sick descent toward his stomach. The clock read 7:54. His interview was at 8:15. Harlan Engineering was still 6 miles away. In perfect traffic, with no delays, with luck riding shotgun, he'd arrive with maybe 3 minutes to spare. He should drive past. The woman had a phone. She was calling someone. She'd be fine. This wasn't his responsibility. This wasn't his problem. He had exactly one shot at changing his life, and it was evaporating with every second he spent even considering this. Marcus pressed the accelerator. The Civic moved forward. He watched the woman shrink in his rearview mirror, her figure getting smaller, her problem becoming someone else's responsibility. His foot found the brake. The Civic slowed, stopped, then began rolling backward down the empty shoulder. Marcus pulled up behind the Mercedes, his hazard lights adding to hers in a chorus of mechanical urgency. Through his windshield, he watched the woman turn, her expression shifting from frustration to hope to wariness in the span of a heartbeat. "What are you doing?" Marcus whispered to himself, but his hands were already killing the engine, already reaching for the door handle. The morning air hit him cool and sharp as he stepped onto the gravel shoulder. The industrial corridor hummed with distant machinery, and somewhere a train whistle announced another day of commerce and obligation. The woman watched him approach, and Marcus could see her calculating stranger, isolated road, broken car. She'd been taught to fear this situation, and he couldn't blame her. "Morning," Marcus called out while he was still 15 feet away, keeping his voice gentle, his hands visible. "Saw you were having trouble. I've got some mechanical experience if you want me to take a look." The woman's shoulders relaxed fractionally. Up close, she was probably in her early 40s, with sharp features and eyes that suggested she was more accustomed to giving orders than asking for help. "The engine just died," she said, her voice carrying the precise diction of expensive education. "I've called for assistance, but they're saying 45 minutes minimum." Marcus approached the open hood, careful to maintain respectful distance. The Mercedes' engine was a work of art compared to his Civic. Clean, sophisticated, intimidating. But an engine was an engine, and Marcus had spent enough years coaxing life from dying machines to recognize the usual suspects. "Do you mind if I check a few things?" he asked. The woman gestured permission, stepping back to give him access. Marcus leaned in, his eyes scanning the maze of hoses and cables. The smell of hot metal and oil filled his nose. Familiar, almost comforting. His hands moved automatically, checking connections, testing battery cables, looking for the obvious before diving deeper. "How long have you been stuck out here?" he asked, partly to gather information, partly to fill the awkward silence. 20 minutes, the woman replied. "I was heading to an appointment, critical meeting." Her voice carried an edge of desperation that Marcus recognized intimately, the sound of someone whose carefully constructed day was collapsing into chaos. His fingers found this battery terminal, loose, not completely disconnected, but enough to cause intermittent power loss. "I think I found your problem," Marcus said. "Battery terminals come loose, must have vibrated free. Happens sometimes on these newer models. They use lighter connectors to save weight. Can you fix it?" "Give me 2 minutes." Marcus jogged back to his Civic, his mind already churning through the calculation he was trying to ignore. 2 minutes to tighten the terminal. Another minute to test it. 3 minutes total. Except it was never 3 minutes. It was always more. It was always exactly enough more to turn cutting it close into definitely late. He grabbed his toolbox from the trunk, the same one his father had used, its metal sides dented and scarred from decades of use. Eleanor had wanted to throw it out after his father died, but Marcus had claimed it, understanding even then that he'd need something tangible to hold on to when the world felt like it was spinning away. Back at the Mercedes, Marcus selected a socket wrench and went to work. The woman watched him with an intensity that made him self-conscious of his worn jeans, his construction boots, the way his borrowed tie was already coming loose. "What's your name?" she asked suddenly. "Marcus. Marcus Reed." "Evelyn?" She didn't offer a last name. "That's very kind of you, Marcus. Stopping like this." "Anyone would," Marcus said, though they both knew that wasn't true. They both knew that a dozen cars had probably passed her already, their drivers finding reasons to keep moving, keep minding their own business, keep their lives on schedule. The terminal tightened with satisfying resistance. Marcus tested the connection, then nodded. "Okay, try starting it now." Evelyn slid into the driver's seat, her movements precise despite the circumstances. The engine turned over once, twice, then caught with a purr so smooth it sounded like contentment. Relief flooded her features, years of carefully maintained composure cracking just enough to show the fear underneath. "Oh, thank God," she breathed. "Thank you. Seriously, thank you so much." Marcus began packing his tools, his mind already racing ahead to the highway, calculating whether speed limits were suggestions or mandates when your entire future hung in the balance. "You should have a mechanic check that connection properly," he said. "My fix will hold, but you'll want it secured right." "I will." "Absolutely." Evelyn reached for her purse. "Please, let me pay you for your time." "No need," Marcus said, waving her off. The words came automatically, bred from some code of conduct his father had installed in him about accepting money for helping people in distress. "Just glad you're okay. At least let me give you my card. If you ever need anything, really, I'm fine. You've got a meeting. I've got to run. We're good." But Evelyn was already out of the car, already pulling a business card from her purse with the determined efficiency of someone unaccustomed to having her gestures refused. She pressed it into Marcus's palm, her grip firm. "Please, I insist. Call me if there's ever anything I can do." Marcus glanced at the card long enough to register expensive paper stock and embossed lettering before shoving it into his pocket. "Thank you. Drive safe." He was back in the Civic and accelerating before Evelyn finished her goodbye, his eyes locked on the dashboard clock. 8:03. 12 minutes, 6 miles. The mathematics of desperation calculated themselves in his head, and none of the equations resolved into anything resembling hope. The Civic protested as Marcus pushed it beyond its comfort zone, the engine whining as he wove through the sparse traffic on Route 40. The industrial corridor gave way to commercial district, and traffic thickened with morning commuters who had nowhere urgent to be, who could afford to coast through yellow lights and maintain leisurely speeds. Marcus's phone buzzed. His mother again. He ignored it. At 8:09, he pulled into the Harland Engineering parking lot, his heart hammering against his ribs like it was trying to escape his chest cavity. The building rose before him, 6 stories of glass and steel that represented everything Marcus needed his life to become. He grabbed his folder of documents from the passenger seat, straightened his tie in the rearview mirror, and ran. The lobby was all polished floors and subtle lighting, the kind of space designed to make visitors feel both welcomed and evaluated. Marcus approached the reception desk, breathing hard, aware that his construction boots were tracking small pieces of gravel across their immaculate floor. "Marcus Reed," he managed, his voice tight. "I have an 8:15 interview with Jennifer Morrison." The receptionist, young, professional, her smile perfectly calibrated, checked her computer. "You're a few minutes late, Mr. Reed. Let me call up to Ms. Morrison's office." "It's only 8:11, Marcus said, his voice sharper than intended. "I'm still 4 minutes early." "Our clocks sync with the system," the receptionist replied gently, as though explaining something to a child. "It's 8:16. Marcus looked at his phone. 8:11. He looked at the clock on the wall behind the reception desk. 8:16. His Civic's dashboard was 5 minutes slow, had been for months. Another thing he'd meant to fix but never quite got around to because it didn't matter, because being a few minutes off didn't matter when you were hauling rebar or measuring foundations. Except now it mattered. Now it mattered more than anything. The receptionist murmured into her phone, her expression shifting into professional sympathy, the look people wore when delivering bad news they didn't cause but had to communicate anyway. She hung up, and Marcus knew the answer before she spoke. "I'm sorry, Mr. Reed. Miss Morrison says punctuality is essential for this position, and she's moved on to other candidates. We appreciate your interest in Harland Engineering." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow, stealing the air from his lungs. "Please," he said, and heard the desperation in his voice, hated himself for it but couldn't stop it. "I was helping someone. A woman was stranded. I just needed to—" "I understand, and that's very admirable," the receptionist said, her tone suggesting she'd heard every excuse ever invented for missing appointments. "But the decision has been made. I'm sorry." Marcus stood there for a long moment, his folder of documents clutched uselessly in his hand, the carefully prepared references, the transcript from his incomplete degree, the letter of recommendation from his construction supervisor that had taken 3 weeks to obtain. All of it worthless now. All of it wasted. He turned and walked back across that polished lobby, his boots leaving traces of industrial road gravel like a trail of evidence marking where hope had come to die. His reflection followed him in the glass doors, a man in a borrowed tie and worn jeans who'd mistaken kindness for wisdom. The drive back felt longer than the drive there. Marcus let the Civic drift at whatever speed felt natural, no longer racing time because time had already won. The morning sun climbed higher, indifferent to individual tragedy, warming the industrial corridor where Evelyn's Mercedes had long since departed. His phone buzzed. Marcus finally answered. "Well?" His mother's voice carried forced optimism, already preparing for disappointment because she'd learned to expect it. "I was late," Marcus said simply. "They didn't interview me." The silence on the other end lasted 3 seconds, which was long enough for Marcus to feel every disappointment he'd ever caused crystallize into this single moment. "Marcus?" Eleanor's voice had shifted into the tone she'd perfected over years of addressing her son's failures. "How? The interview was scheduled weeks ago. How could you possibly be late?" "There was a woman stranded on the road. Her car broke down. I stopped to help." Another silence, this one somehow heavier. "You stopped?" "Yes." "You stopped to help a stranger, knowing you had a critical interview, knowing this was your chance to finally provide properly for Ava, and you stopped." Marcus could picture his mother in her small, immaculate apartment, her hand pressed to her forehead in the gesture of exhaustion she'd inherited from her own mother. "Yes," he said again, because there was nothing else to say. "Marcus, I don't—" Eleanor's voice cracked slightly. "I don't understand you. I genuinely don't understand how you make these choices. That woman could have called a tow truck. She probably had insurance, roadside assistance, a dozen other resources. And you threw away your future to fix her car? She was scared, Mom. She was alone on an empty road. And you have a daughter who needs stability. You have responsibilities that don't end just because some stranger has a convenient crisis. Eleanor's voice was rising now, anger mixing with the fear underneath. When are you going to stop sacrificing your family for strangers? When are you going to put Ava first? The accusation hit its mark because part of Marcus feared it was true. I always put Ava first, he said quietly. Then act like it. Get your priorities straight. Stop playing hero to people who don't even know your name while your daughter goes to school with cardboard in her shoes. Marcus ended the call without responding because responding would require defending a choice he wasn't certain he could defend. He'd chosen kindness over opportunity. He'd chosen a stranger's immediate crisis over his daughter's long-term security. He'd made the choice his father would have made, the choice Sarah would have made, the choice that felt right in his bones, even as it destroyed his prospects. And maybe that's what terrified him most, that he'd do it again. That given the same circumstances, the same impossible calculation, he'd make the same choice and lose everything again. The apartment was quiet when Marcus walked in at 9:30, still wearing his interview clothes like a costume he couldn't quite justify taking off. His neighbor Mrs. Chen had taken Ava to school, part of the informal childcare arrangement they'd worked out months ago. The apartment felt smaller in the daylight, shabbier, every crack in the plaster and stain on the carpet suddenly visible in harsh relief. Marcus sat at their small kitchen table, still holding his folder of useless documents. Beside his elbow sat Ava's latest school project, a family tree she was constructing out of construction paper and photographs. She'd placed Sarah's picture at the top, drawn careful branches connecting mother to father to daughter, and written in her careful third-grade handwriting, "My mom was brave and kind. My dad is brave and kind. That's what makes us a family." Marcus's phone buzzed with a text from the Morrison construction site manager. "You coming in today or what? Got 2 guys out sick. Need hands." He texted back confirmation and went to change into work clothes. Jeans already stained with concrete dust, boots that had steel toes and worn treads, shirts that didn't matter if they got destroyed. The transformation took 3 minutes. Marcus Reed, the engineering candidate, became Marcus Reed, the construction worker, his potential compressed back into manual labor. The construction site was organized chaos when Marcus arrived. Heavy equipment grinding, workers shouting over the noise, the smell of fresh concrete and diesel fuel mixing in the warm air. The project was massive, some kind of corporate complex that would eventually house offices and retail space. Marcus didn't know the details. He just knew where to stack the rebar and how many bags of concrete mix to load. "Reed, about time!" Jackson, the site manager, waved him over. "Need you on the 3rd floor. They're behind on the framing." Marcus grabbed his tool belt and headed up. The work was mindless in the best way. Measuring, cutting, securing supports, his body moving through practiced motions while his mind went elsewhere. His back ached, his hands hurt. The borrowed tie was folded in his locker, ready to return to the coworker who'd lent it with such optimism. "Hey, Marcus!" Danny Chen, Mrs. Chen's grandson, appeared beside him during the lunch break. At 19, Danny still had the enthusiasm of someone who believed construction was temporary, just a stepping stone to something better. "How'd the interview go?" Marcus bit into his sandwich, peanut butter and jelly, same as Ava's lunchbox. "Didn't happen. I was late." "Damn, man. I'm sorry." Danny's disappointment seemed genuine. "You gonna reschedule?" They weren't interested in rescheduling. They ate in silence for a while, watching the city spread out beneath them, buildings and streets and thousands of people living lives that didn't intersect with their own. Marcus thought about Evelyn in her Mercedes, probably in her critical meeting by now, her morning crisis resolved and forgotten. She'd given him a business card. He'd shoved it in his pocket and hadn't looked at it since. "My grandmother said your little girl is real sweet," Danny offered eventually. "Said she helps her with groceries without being asked." "She's a good kid," Marcus agreed, feeling the familiar swell of pride and terror that came with being solely responsible for shaping a human being. "Better than I deserve." "Nah, man, Mrs. Chen says you're doing great. Says Ava's lucky to have a dad who shows up." Marcus wanted to argue that showing up wasn't enough when showing up happened in construction boots instead of at engineering firms, when showing up meant choosing strangers over opportunities. But Danny's phone buzzed, and the lunch break ended, and Marcus returned to the mindless rhythm of physical labor that didn't care about his choices or their consequences. The afternoon stretched long. Marcus's lower back began its familiar protest around 2:00, sharp enough that he had to pause and stretch, breathing through the pain. He'd learned to push through it, learned that stopping meant losing hours, losing pay, losing the fragile security that kept Ava fed and sheltered. At 4:30, Jackson appeared on the third floor, his expression uncertain. "Reed, there's someone downstairs asking for you. Says it's personal." Marcus's heart jumped. Ava's school? An emergency? He took the stairs fast, ignoring his back's protest. In the site office trailer, a woman waited, professional, uncomfortable in her business suit among the construction detritus. "Marcus Reed?" she asked, consulting a tablet. "My name is Jennifer Morrison. I'm with Harland Engineering." Marcus froze. The woman from the interview he'd missed. She looked different here, smaller somehow, less intimidating outside her corporate environment. "Ma'am? I wanted to speak with you about this morning. You said you were helping someone?" "Yes." Marcus became aware of his appearance, concrete dust in his hair, sweat staining his shirt, the smell of manual labor clinging to him. A woman was stranded. Her car broke down. "Can you describe her?" "Mid-40s, dark hair, expensive suit, nice car, Mercedes." Marcus paused. "Why?" Jennifer Morrison's expression shifted into something between professional curiosity and genuine surprise. "Because that woman just called our office. She wanted to know why we weren't interviewing a man named Marcus Reed who sacrificed his appointment to help her. A man who, in her words, demonstrated exactly the kind of problem-solving and character she looks for in employees." The site office seemed to tilt slightly. Marcus steadied himself against a desk. "I don't understand." "The woman you helped this morning was Evelyn Cross. She owns about 30 buildings in this city, including the one Harland Engineering rents space in." Jennifer Morrison smiled slightly. "She was quite insistent that we give you another opportunity. So I'm here to reschedule your interview if you're still interested." Marcus couldn't speak. His throat had closed around words that wouldn't come, gratitude and disbelief and something like vindication all tangled together. "Tomorrow, 2:00 p.m. Does that work for you?" "Yes," Marcus managed. "Yes, that works." Jennifer handed him a new business card. "Don't be late this time, Mr. Reed." She left, and Marcus stood alone in the site office trailer, holding a business card that represented a second chance he hadn't believed in. He pulled Evelyn's card from his wallet. Elegant, expensive, with a name he now recognized. Evelyn Cross, Cross Real Estate Holdings. His phone buzzed. Ava, texting from Mrs. Chen's apartment. "Daddy, when are you coming home? I made you a picture." Marcus typed back. "Soon, sweetheart. Got some good news to share." He returned to work, but everything had changed. The rebar felt lighter. His back hurt less. The afternoon sun seemed warmer, more forgiving. Because sometimes, Marcus thought as he measured and cut and secured supports for a building that would stand long after he was gone, sometimes choosing kindness didn't cost you everything. Sometimes it was an investment you didn't know you were making until the returns arrived when you needed them most. Marcus arrived home that evening carrying more than just exhaustion and concrete dust. He carried possibility, fragile and uncertain as morning frost, but real enough to make his hands shake slightly as he unlocked the apartment door. Ava looked up from her homework at the kitchen table, her face lighting with the uncomplicated joy of an 8-year-old whose father had returned exactly when promised. "Daddy, look what I made!" She thrust forward a drawing, crayon renderings of 2 figures, one tall and one small, standing beneath what might have been a sun or possibly a flower. The proportions were wrong, the perspective impossible, but the love radiating from those waxy lines was perfectly clear. Marcus knelt beside her chair, pulling her into a hug that lasted longer than usual. She smelled like Mrs. Chen's apartment, jasmine tea, and something sweet she'd probably baked. "It's beautiful, sweetheart. Is that us?" "It's us when you get your new job," Ava said with the absolute certainty of a child who hadn't yet learned that wanting something badly enough didn't make it real. You're wearing a tie and I'm wearing my good dress that Grandma gave me. Marcus's chest tightened. The good dress was 2 sizes too small now, but Ava wouldn't admit it because Eleanor had driven 3 hours to deliver it for Ava's last birthday, and throwing it out felt like betraying that rare gesture of tenderness. About that job, honey, I've got another interview tomorrow. Ava's eyes widened. Really? What happened to today? Today got complicated, but tomorrow's a new chance. Marcus stood, his knees protesting. How was school? Mrs. Patterson said my book report was really good. She wrote excellent analysis at the top. Ava pointed to her backpack where the paper emerged, decorated with a large A+ in red marker. And Tommy Garcia said his dad is hiring at the warehouse if you need work. The casual way she said it broke Marcus's heart a little. 8 years old, and she was already collecting job leads for her father, already understanding that their security was so fragile that elementary school gossip might contain their next rent payment. That's sweet of Tommy, but I'm good right now. Morrison's keeping me busy. They made dinner together, spaghetti with jarred sauce, garlic bread from the discount bakery, salad from the vegetables Mrs. Chen had shared from her weekly market trip. Simple food, but Ava set the table with careful precision, folding paper napkins into triangles the way Sarah had taught her before she got too sick to care about such things. Daddy? Ava asked around a mouthful of pasta. Why didn't you make it to your interview today? Marcus considered lying, offering some sanitized version that would spare her the complexity of adult decisions. But Sarah had made him promise, in those final weeks when promises were all she could extract, that he'd never lie to their daughter about important things. I stopped to help someone whose car broke down. It made me late. Ava nodded slowly, processing this. Was the person okay? Yeah, sweetheart. She was okay. Then you did the right thing. Ava said it with such simple conviction that Marcus felt something loosen in his chest, some knot of doubt that had been tightening since his mother's phone call. Mom always said helping people is more important than being on time. Mom said a lot of wise things. I miss her, Ava said quietly, her fork pausing halfway to her mouth. Do you think she knows about your new interview? Marcus reached across the table, covering his daughter's small hand with his scarred, calloused one. I think if there's any way for her to know, she does. And I think she's proud of you for being so brave. I'm not brave, I'm just me. Sometimes those are the same thing. They finished dinner, and Marcus helped Ava with her math homework while ignoring the bills stacked on the counter, overdue electric, car insurance, the notice from the dentist about Ava's checkup that he'd been postponing for 3 months. Tomorrow's interview felt like a lottery ticket, and Marcus had never been lucky with lottery tickets. But Evelyn Cross had called Harland Engineering. She'd insisted they give him another chance. That had to mean something. After Ava went to bed, Marcus sat at the kitchen table with his phone and Evelyn's business card. The embossed letters caught the overhead light. Evelyn Cross, President and CEO, Cross Real Estate Holdings. The address was downtown, in one of those glass towers that Marcus had helped build the foundation for years ago when he was younger, and his back didn't ache quite so persistently. He typed out a text message 3 times, deleting it each time because gratitude sounded either too casual or too desperate. Finally, he settled on simple truth. Ms. Cross, this is Marcus Reed. I wanted to thank you for calling Harland Engineering. Your kindness means more than you know. I hope your meeting went well. He hit send before he could overthink it further, then immediately regretted the presumption of texting someone who probably had assistants to handle communications from people like him. But his phone buzzed 30 seconds later. Mr. Reed, I'm glad they reached you. Your meeting is 2 p.m. tomorrow. Good luck. You earned this chance. EC. Marcus read the message twice, then a third time, looking for subtext or obligation he might have missed. But it seemed straightforward, encouragement from someone who'd been helped and wanted to help in return. The simplicity of it made him trust it more than elaborate promises would have. Sleep came slowly that night. Marcus lay in the small bedroom he'd shared with Sarah, now occupied by just himself and the ghost of better times, and ran through tomorrow's interview in his mind. What would they ask? What could he say about the 6-year gap in his technical education? How could he explain that he'd chosen love and grief and survival over career advancement and make it sound like wisdom instead of desperation? His alarm went off at 5:30 a.m., 2 hours before Ava needed to wake for school. Marcus showered, shaved carefully around the small scar on his jaw from a construction accident last year, and stood before his closet considering his limited options. The borrowed tie had been returned. His one good shirt was wrinkled. His dress pants were from his wedding, a decade out of style and slightly too loose now from the weight he'd lost during Sarah's illness. He ironed the shirt with a precision that would have made Eleanor proud, pressed the pants, and decided his construction boots would have to do because his only dress shoes had split soles, and buying new ones meant Ava wouldn't get the field trip money her teacher kept requesting. Sometimes poverty was just an endless series of small, humiliating compromises. Ava emerged from her bedroom at 7 o'clock, her hair wild from sleep, wearing the oversized t-shirt she favored for pajamas. "Is it interview day?" "It is." Marcus poured cereal into her bowl, added the milk they'd stretched thin to last the week. "Mrs. Chen's going to pick you up from school again. I should be home by dinner." "You look nice, Daddy." Ava studied him seriously. "Really professional." "Thank you, sweetheart." Marcus smoothed his shirt self-consciously. "Think I can convince them to hire me?" "I think you can convince them you're the smartest person they'll meet today," Ava said with fierce loyalty. "Because you are." Marcus drove Ava to school himself, a luxury he usually couldn't afford with the construction site starting at 7 o'clock. But Jackson had given him the morning off after hearing about the rescheduled interview, had even clapped him on the shoulder and said, "Go get it, Reed. Show those office types what real talent looks like." The elementary school parking lot was chaos. Minivans and SUVs, mothers in yoga pants and fathers in business suits, everyone moving with the harried efficiency of people perpetually 5 minutes behind schedule. Marcus watched Ava hop out, her backpack nearly as large as she was, and felt the familiar surge of pride and terror. She was so small, so vulnerable, so dependent on his ability to keep making the right choices in a world that punished most of his choices. "Love you, Daddy," she called, already running toward her classroom where her friends waited. "Love you more," Marcus called back, not caring that other parents might judge a construction worker in dress pants shouting sentiments in a school parking lot. The drive downtown took 40 minutes in morning traffic. Marcus listened to a news station discussing economic recovery and employment statistics, numbers that felt abstract when you were living paycheck to paycheck. The city transformed as he drove, industrial corridors giving way to commercial districts, then to the gleaming financial center where buildings reached toward the sky with the confidence of institutions too big to fail. Harland Engineering occupied floors 4 through 6 of the Meridian Tower, a structure Marcus vaguely remembered helping build foundations for back when he was 23 and still believed hard work guaranteed success. The lobby was vast and intimidating, marble floors, abstract art that probably cost more than Marcus's annual income, security guards who looked like they'd been hired specifically to make blue-collar visitors feel unwelcome. Marcus approached the desk at 1:30, giving himself a 30-minute buffer he hoped signaled reliability without seeming desperate. The security guard checked his ID, made a phone call, then directed him to the 4th floor with the detached courtesy of someone who processed hundreds of visitors daily and remembered none of them. The elevator was glass-walled, offering views of the city shrinking beneath him as he rose. Marcus caught his reflection in the polished interior, a man in pressed pants and slightly worn boots, trying to look like he belonged in a world that had never been designed for people like him. The 4th-floor reception area was exactly what he'd expected. Sleek furniture, soft lighting, the kind of calculated professionalism that whispered competence and stability. The receptionist was different from yesterday's woman, older and somehow kinder in her expression. "Marcus Reed," he said, proud that his voice remained steady. "I have a 2:00 p.m. interview with Jennifer Morrison." "Of course, Mr. Reed. Please have a seat. Miss Morrison is finishing up a meeting and will be with you shortly. Can I get you water? Coffee?" "Water would be great, thank you." Marcus accepted the bottle she offered, noting the company logo printed on expensive-looking glass. Even their water containers suggested success. He sat in one of the waiting area chairs, its leather so soft it felt like an embrace. Around him, the office hummed with productive energy, phones ringing, keyboards clicking, voices discussing projects and deadlines in the shorthand of people who shared professional language. This could be his world, Marcus thought. This could be where he spent his days, using his mind instead of destroying his body, building a future instead of just surviving the present. His phone buzzed. His mother. "Praying for you today. You can do this." Eleanor's prayers had become more frequent since Sarah died, as though she'd decided faith might succeed where maternal lectures had failed. Marcus appreciated the sentiment even if he'd stopped believing prayers changed anything. He texted back a simple "thanks, Mom," and tried to settle his nerves. At 2:00 precisely, Jennifer Morrison emerged from an interior hallway. She was probably 50, with silver-streaked hair and the kind of professional warmth that came from decades of managing people. "Mr. Reed, thank you for coming. Please, follow me." The interview room was small but comfortable. A conference table, comfortable chairs, windows offering views of the city stretched out beneath them. Jennifer gestured for Marcus to sit, then settled across from him with a folder that presumably contained his application materials. "I appreciate you being willing to reschedule," she began. "And I apologize for yesterday's inflexibility. We have policies about punctuality, but perhaps we applied them too rigidly." "I understand," Marcus said, though he didn't entirely. Policies were just rules, and rules could be bent when circumstances warranted. But he knew better than to argue with potential employers about their own procedures. "Tell me about your technical background." Jennifer opened the folder, scanning documents Marcus had assembled weeks ago. "You have excellent transcripts from State Technical, but you didn't complete your degree. What happened?" This was the question Marcus had been dreading and preparing for in equal measure. The truth was complicated, painful, and risked making him sound like someone who made poor choices under pressure. But Sarah's voice echoed in his memory. "Never lie about the important things. My wife was diagnosed with cancer halfway through my program. The treatment options that offered the best chances weren't covered by our insurance. I made the choice to work full-time and take care of her rather than continue school." Jennifer's expression softened fractionally. "I'm sorry, that must have been incredibly difficult." "It was the right choice," Marcus said firmly. "I'd make it again, but it did mean my career trajectory got derailed." "And after? You've been doing construction work?" "Yes, ma'am. Morrison Construction. Going on 4 years now. Started as general labor, worked up to skilled positions. I can read blueprints, handle complex measurements, troubleshoot structural issues. The foreman trusts me with technical problem solving." "But you want to move into engineering." Marcus chose his words carefully. "I want to use my education. I want my daughter to see me use my mind as well as my hands. And I need work that won't destroy my body before I'm 50. The honesty of that last statement seemed to land. Jennifer made a note on her pad. "Tell me about the situation yesterday. Evelyn Cross was quite impressed by how you handled her car trouble." "The battery terminal had vibrated loose. Simple fix, maybe 3 minutes of actual work. I tightened it, tested the connection, made sure it would hold until she could get proper service." "But you knew stopping would make you late." "Yes, ma'am." "Why did you stop?" Marcus had asked himself this question 100 times in the past 24 hours, probing his motivations like a dentist searching for decay. Because she needed help, and I could provide it. Because being on time felt less important than making sure someone scared and alone got safely to wherever they needed to be. Because that's what my father would have done, and what my wife would have done, and what I want my daughter to learn to do. Jennifer studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. "You understand we need reliability in this position. Engineers work on deadlines. Clients have expectations. We can't have someone who stops to help strangers when there are professional obligations." Marcus felt something crack open in his chest. Not quite anger, but close to it. "With respect, ma'am, if you're looking for someone who drives past people in trouble because they have a meeting to attend, I'm not your candidate. I can be reliable and punctual and professional. I can meet deadlines and exceed expectations. But I won't become the kind of person who values convenience over compassion." The room went very quiet. Jennifer's pen paused over her notepad. Marcus wondered if he'd just talked himself out of a job by being honest about who he was and who he refused to become. But the alternative was pretending, and pretending had never been his strength. "Fair enough," Jennifer said finally. and something in her expression shifted toward approval. Let's talk about your technical skills. I'm going to describe a structural problem, and I want you to walk me through how you'd approach solving it. The next 40 minutes passed in a blur of technical discussion. Jennifer presented scenarios, load-bearing calculations, material stress assessments, foundation integrity questions, and Marcus answered them, drawing on his incomplete education and years of practical construction experience. He could feel himself relaxing into the familiar territory of engineering problems, where right and wrong were matters of mathematics and physics rather than moral judgment. "Impressive," Jennifer said when they'd exhausted her prepared scenarios. "You think like an engineer, Mr. Reed. Your practical experience has actually enhanced your theoretical knowledge in ways that fresh graduates often lack." Hope fluttered in Marcus's chest like something with fragile wings. "Thank you, ma'am. I need to be honest with you about something." Jennifer closed her folder. "This is an entry-level position. The pay is adequate but not generous, $48,000 annually to start, with benefits after 6 months. That's probably less than you're making in construction." "It's more than enough," Marcus said, doing the quick calculation. 48,000 meant 4,000 monthly, minus taxes maybe 3,000 take-home, which was nearly double what he currently netted. "It's plenty." "You'd be working with a team, taking direction from senior engineers, doing a lot of detail work that might seem tedious. It's not glamorous." "I'm hauling rebar in 90-degree heat right now. I promise. Office work sounds glamorous." Jennifer smiled, the first genuine warmth breaking through her professional facade. "I'm going to be straight with you, Mr. Reed. Evelyn Cross didn't just suggest we interview you. She called me personally and vouched for your character. That carries significant weight. But I still need to make a business decision, and I need to know you'll commit to this role for at least 2 years. We invest in training our junior engineers, and we can't afford high turnover. If you hire me, you'll have to physically remove me from this building to make me leave," Marcus said, with enough intensity that Jennifer laughed outright. "Okay then. I'll have a decision for you by Friday. We're interviewing 2 other candidates tomorrow, but I want you to know you're a strong contender." They stood, shook hands, and Marcus thanked her with the kind of gratitude that came from understanding exactly how rare second chances were. He rode the elevator back down to the marble lobby, his mind already racing ahead to what $48,000 could mean. Ava in shoes without cardboard, checkups at the dentist, maybe even savings for the emergencies that seemed to arrive monthly. The afternoon sun was warm on his face as Marcus emerged from the Meridian Tower. He pulled out his phone and texted Evelyn Cross. "Just finished the interview. Thank you again for making this possible." Her response came quickly. "How did it go?" "Better than I expected. She said Friday for a decision." Fingers crossed. You deserve this, Marcus. He wanted to ask why she'd gone to such lengths for a stranger, why his 3 minutes of help had warranted her personal intervention with Harland Engineering. But some gifts shouldn't be questioned too closely. Instead, he texted back a simple "thank you" and drove toward the construction site. Jackson looked surprised when Marcus appeared at 3:30, still in his interview clothes. "Reed? Thought you'd take the whole day." "Interview finished early. Figured I'd get some hours in." Marcus headed for the locker room to change, but Jackson caught his arm. "How'd it go?" "Won't know until Friday, but I think it went well." "Good. You deserve a break, man. You're too smart to be breaking your back here." Jackson released his arm. "Take the rest of the day. Get your head straight. No point coming in for 2 hours when you've got bigger things to think about." Marcus wanted to argue that 2 hours meant $30, and $30 meant groceries, but Jackson's expression made it clear this was an order disguised as kindness. "Thanks, boss." He drove to Ava's school, arriving 20 minutes before dismissal. The parking lot was nearly empty, just a few cars belonging to teachers or early parents. Marcus sat in his Civic and watched the building, thinking about the girl inside who was learning math and reading, and how to navigate a world that would judge her father's choices long before it judged her own merit. His phone rang. Eleanor's name on the screen. Marcus considered letting it go to voicemail, but his mother's timing suggested she'd been waiting by her phone for news. "Hi, Mom." "Well, how did it go?" "They'll let me know by Friday. The interviewer seemed positive." "Seemed positive isn't a job offer, Marcus." Eleanor's voice carried that familiar blend of hope and skepticism that had characterized her parenting style for as long as Marcus could remember. "But it's better than what happened yesterday." It is. I've been thinking about what you said, about helping that woman. Eleanor paused, and Marcus could picture her in her kitchen, staring out the window at the bird feeder she kept meticulously stocked. Your father would have done the same thing. He would have stopped, fixed her car, lost his appointment. He was always helping people. I remember, Marcus said quietly. His father had died when Marcus was 16, a heart attack at work, sudden and devastating. But Marcus's memories were full of small kindnesses. Neighbors' lawnmowers repaired for free, friends' cars diagnosed in driveways, strangers helped because help was needed. I was angry at him for it sometimes, Eleanor continued, for giving away his time and energy to people who never appreciated it. But people came to his funeral, Marcus, people I'd never met, and they told me stories about how your father had helped them, had changed their lives with small gestures he probably never thought about twice. Marcus's throat tightened. Mom, what I'm saying is, you're like him. You're so much like him it terrifies me sometimes. And I get scared that you'll give and give until there's nothing left, until you've sacrificed everything for strangers who won't remember your name. But yesterday, that woman remembered. She remembered, and she tried to give back. Maybe that's what happens when you're like your father. Maybe the world pays attention. I miss him, Marcus said, his voice rough. I know, sweetheart. So do I. Eleanor's voice softened further. Ava's lucky to have you. I don't say that enough. I focus on what you haven't accomplished instead of recognizing what you've done. You've kept that little girl fed and safe and loved through circumstances that would have broken most people. That matters more than job titles. The school bell rang, and children began pouring from the building in chaotic streams of backpacks and energy. Thanks, Mom. I need to get Ava. Call me Friday when you hear. I will. Love you. Love you too, Marcus. Ava spotted the Civic immediately and ran toward it, her face split by a huge smile. She climbed into the passenger seat, her backpack thudding against the door. Daddy, you're early. How did it go? It went really well, sweetheart. They'll tell me Friday if I got the job. You got it, Ava said with absolute confidence. I can tell by your face, you got it. Marcus wanted to caution her against hope, to prepare her for disappointment, to teach her that wanting something badly enough didn't guarantee success. But she looked so happy, so certain, and he didn't have the heart to dim that light. Maybe I did. They drove home through late afternoon traffic, Ava chattering about her day, a science experiment with baking soda and vinegar, a spelling test she'd aced, the announcement that her class would be taking a field trip to the Science Museum in 3 weeks. Marcus listened and made appropriate responses while his mind cataloged expenses, field trip money, new shoes that could no longer be postponed, the electric bill that had arrived with a final notice stamp. Daddy? Ava asked as they pulled into the apartment complex parking lot. If you get the job, does that mean things will be better? Marcus turned to face his daughter, studying her serious expression, the old soul wisdom in eyes too young to carry such understanding. Things are already good, honey. We have each other. We have a home. We have people who care about us. But yes, if I get this job, things will be easier. You'll get new shoes without me worrying about it. We'll go out for pizza sometimes. Maybe we'll even take a vacation. Where would we go? Where do you want to go? Ava considered this seriously. The ocean. Mom used to tell me about the ocean, about how big it is and how the waves sound. I want to see that. Marcus felt his eyes sting. Sarah had grown up near the coast, and her stories about childhood summers at the beach had been some of Ava's favorite bedtime tales. Then that's where we'll go. The ocean. They went inside and Marcus changed into comfortable clothes while Ava started her homework at the kitchen table. The apartment felt smaller than usual, the walls closer, every mark and stain suddenly visible. But it was theirs. They'd made it home through sheer determination and love. That had to count for something. His phone buzzed with a text from Danny Chen. My grandma wants to know if you and Ava want to come for dinner tonight. She made too much. Mrs. Chen's too much was code for noticing that Marcus and Ava were surviving on pasta and peanut butter. Pride suggested he should decline, but pride didn't fill empty stomachs, and Mrs. Chen's generosity deserved better than false independence. Marcus texted back, We'd love to, thank you. Dinner at the Chen apartment was warm and chaotic. Danny's younger siblings arguing good-naturedly, Mrs. Chen presiding over a table loaded with enough food to feed twice their number, the comfortable noise of family filling spaces that money couldn't touch. Ava helped serve the younger children, her natural nurturing instinct finding outlet and making sure everyone's plate was full. "So, the interview," Mrs. Chen said, loading Marcus's plate with more food than he could possibly eat. "Danny says it's a good company." "It is. Engineering firm. Real opportunity. You'll get it," Mrs. Chen said with the same certainty Ava had displayed. "You're smart, hard worker, good father. They'd be lucky to have you." Marcus wanted to believe her, wanted to accept that competence and character would be enough. But he'd learned that the world didn't always reward the right people, that sometimes good wasn't good enough, that luck mattered more than anyone wanted to admit. After dinner, Marcus helped clean up while Ava played with the younger Chen children in the living room. Through the kitchen window, he could see the apartment complex courtyard, cracked concrete, dying grass, a playground with equipment that probably violated safety codes. This was where they lived. This was what they'd made work. But it didn't have to be forever. Walking back to their apartment, Ava's small hand in his, Marcus felt the weight of Friday's decision pressing down on him. 2 more days of not knowing. 2 more days of trying to prepare for both success and failure. 2 more days of being suspended between who he was and who he might become. "Daddy?" Ava asked as he tucked her into bed. "Do you think Mom knows about your interview?" "I think she knows everything important," Marcus said, smoothing hair from his daughter's forehead. "And I think she's proud of us for keeping going. I hope you get the job, not because I want new shoes or to go to the ocean. I hope you get it because you look sad when you come home from construction, and I want you to be happy." Marcus kissed her forehead, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. Sometimes his daughter's perception felt like a burden she shouldn't have to carry, this understanding that her father was hurting and hiding it poorly. "I love you more than anything in this world." "I love you more than that," Ava countered, her ritual response. "Impossible." "Possible." Marcus turned out the light and stood in her doorway for a long moment, watching her settle into sleep. He'd made so many choices to get to this moment, some good, some desperate, all done with the singular goal of keeping this child safe and loved and whole. If the job came through, it would validate those choices. If it didn't, he'd find another way forward because that's what parents did. They found ways forward even when forward looked impossible. His phone buzzed one last time before he went to sleep. Evelyn Cross. "Whatever happens Friday, you made the right choice yesterday morning. Character matters more than career advancement. Never forget that." Marcus read the message twice, then saved it before turning off his phone. Character matters more than career advancement. Maybe that was true. Maybe in some cosmic ledger, kindness accumulated value that eventually paid dividends. Or maybe sometimes good people got lucky, and luck was just another word for grace arriving when you'd stopped expecting it. Either way, Friday would tell him which version of the story he was living, the one where helping strangers cost him everything, or the one where it revealed that everything he needed had been inside him all along. He just needed someone to see it and give him the chance to prove he'd been capable all along. Friday arrived with the kind of slow inevitability that made Marcus question whether time actually passed at a consistent rate or if the universe had mechanisms for stretching certain days into small eternities. He woke at 5 o'clock a.m. despite not needing to be at the construction site until 7 o'clock, his mind already racing through scenarios he couldn't control. Jennifer Morrison had said they'd have a decision by Friday, but she hadn't specified when. Morning? Afternoon? Close of business? The ambiguity felt intentional, a test of composure that Marcus was already failing. Ava found him at the kitchen table an hour later, his hands wrapped around a coffee mug he'd forgotten to drink from, staring at his phone like he could will it to ring through sheer concentration. "It's today, right?" she asked, pouring herself cereal with the careful precision of someone who'd learned early that spills meant waste they couldn't afford. "They're supposed to call today." "That's what they said." Marcus forced himself to look away from his phone, to focus on his daughter's face instead of the device that held his future. "But today is kind of a long time, isn't it? 24 hours, minus the time that already passed, minus sleeping time." Ava calculated while she chewed, her mind working through the math with the same intensity she brought to her homework. So maybe 16 hours? That's not that long. When you're 8, 16 hours is nothing. When you're 35 and waiting for someone to decide your future, it's forever. Ava considered this seriously. Is that why grown-ups always seem so tired? Because waiting takes longer when you're old? I'm not old, Marcus protested, though his back chose that moment to remind him that 4 years of construction work had aged his body in ways that contradicted his birth certificate. And yes, waiting gets harder as you get older because you understand better what you're waiting for. I understand what we're waiting for. A job that makes you happy and pays for new shoes and maybe someday the ocean. Marcus pulled her into a hug, pressing his face into her hair that smelled like the cheap shampoo they bought in bulk. You're too smart for your own good. You know that? Mom used to say the same thing. She said I got it from both of you. The mention of Sarah still hit like a small electric shock, painful but not entirely unwelcome. Marcus had learned to live with grief the way people learn to live with chronic pain, managing it, accommodating it, understanding it would never fully disappear. Your mom was the smart one. I just looked good standing next to her. That's not true and you know it, Ava said with the absolute certainty of a child who'd inherited her mother's inability to tolerate false modesty. You're really smart, Daddy. You just haven't had the chance to show people yet. Marcus dropped Ava at school with the usual routine, backpack check, lunch money confirmation, reminder about Mrs. Chen picking her up. But today, Ava added something new, pressing both palms against his cheeks the way she did when she needed him to really hear her. They're going to say yes, she whispered. I know they are. And tonight, we're going to celebrate. Baby, we don't know. I know, Ava interrupted. I know the same way I know when it's going to rain or when you're sad, even when you pretend you're not. They're going to say yes. She ran toward the school building before Marcus could respond, her backpack bouncing against her small frame, leaving him sitting in the parking lot wondering when his daughter had become so certain about things he couldn't even let himself hope for. The construction site felt different that morning. Or maybe Marcus just felt different, hyper-aware of his phone's weight in his pocket, checking it every 15 minutes even though he'd turned the ringer volume to maximum. Jackson noticed his distraction by 9 a.m. Reed, you're measuring that frame 3 times and cutting it 0 times. Either focus or go sit in your truck until the call comes. I'm focused, Marcus said, but he'd lost track of which measurement he'd just taken, his mind refusing to engage with tasks that suddenly felt temporary and unimportant. You're a disaster, Jackson said without real criticism. Go take an early lunch. Walk around. Do something other than stand here vibrating with anxiety. Marcus started to protest, but his phone buzzed in his pocket and his heart rate tripled in the space of a single breath. He fumbled for it, nearly dropping it in his haste, then felt disappointment crash over him when he saw his mother's name instead of an unknown number. Mom, I can't talk right now. I'm waiting for— I know what you're waiting for, Eleanor interrupted. I've been waiting too. I just wanted to tell you that no matter what happens today, you're going to be okay. You and Ava, you're going to be okay. Something in her voice caught Marcus's attention, some quality he couldn't quite identify. Mom, are you all right? I'm fine. I'm just— Eleanor paused, and Marcus heard her take a shaky breath. I'm just thinking about your father, how proud he'd be of you, how much he'd love Ava. And I'm realizing I don't say that enough. I focus on what you haven't done instead of seeing what you have done, and that's not fair to you. Mom, where is this coming from? From watching my son sacrifice everything for the people he loves and wondering if I ever thanked him for it. For taking care of Sarah. For raising Ava alone. For being exactly the kind of man your father hoped you'd become. Eleanor's voice cracked slightly. So I'm saying it now. Thank you, and I'm proud of you. Whether you get this job or not, I'm proud of you. Marcus had to sit down on a stack of lumber, his legs suddenly unreliable. His mother wasn't given to emotional declarations, had built her personality around pragmatic stoicism after his father died. Hearing her voice shake with feeling was disorienting in ways that made him understand how much he'd needed to hear these words without realizing he needed them. Thanks, Mom, he managed. That means a lot. Call me when you hear. I will. Love you. Love you too, sweetheart. Marcus sat for a long moment after the call ended, staring at the construction site without really seeing it. Around him, the project continued, concrete being poured, frames being erected, the mechanical symphony of building something from nothing. He'd been part of this world for 4 years, had learned its rhythms and demands, had proven he could survive through strength and endurance. But surviving wasn't the same as thriving, and his body knew the difference even if his mind tried to argue otherwise. At 11:30, Marcus's phone rang again. This time the number was unfamiliar, professional-looking, exactly the kind of number that delivered life-changing news. His hand shook as he answered. "Mr. Reed, this is Jennifer Morrison from Harland Engineering." Marcus stood up so fast he got dizzy. "Yes, ma'am. Hello. I'm calling with our decision regarding the junior engineering position." Jennifer's voice was professionally neutral, impossible to read. "We interviewed 3 candidates total, all with strong qualifications. It was a difficult choice." Marcus's heart was doing something arrhythmic and painful in his chest. He couldn't breathe properly. He couldn't think. Every second of silence felt like falling. "Mr. Reed, we'd like to offer you the position." The construction site tilted sideways and then righted itself. Marcus's knees buckled and he sat back down on the lumber stack, his free hand gripping his leg hard enough to hurt. What?" "We'd like to offer you the position," Jennifer repeated, and this time Marcus could hear the smile in her voice. "$48,000 annually to start, full benefits after 6 months, 2 weeks paid vacation. Start date would be Monday, August 3rd. Does that work for you?" "Yes," Marcus said, his voice coming out rough and strange. "Yes, that works. That absolutely works." "Excellent. I'll email you the formal offer letter and new hire paperwork today. You'll need to complete a background check and drug screening before your start date, but we can schedule those for next week. Do you have any questions?" Marcus had approximately 1,000 questions, but his brain had apparently forgotten how to form coherent sentences. No, I don't think so. Thank you. Thank you so much." "We're excited to have you join the team, Mr. Reed. Your interview was impressive, and your problem-solving approach was exactly what we're looking for. See you in 2 weeks." The call ended and Marcus sat perfectly still, his phone pressed against his ear even though the line had gone dead. Around him, construction continued, hammers pounding, saws cutting, men shouting measurements and instructions. But Marcus existed in a bubble of stunned silence, where the only sound was his own heartbeat slowly returning to something approaching normal. "Reed!" Jackson's voice cut through the bubble. "Was that the call?" Marcus looked up to find his supervisor standing 5 feet away, his expression caught between curiosity and concern. "I got it," Marcus heard himself say. "I got the job." "Hell yes!" Jackson whooped, then grabbed Marcus's shoulder and shook him hard enough to rattle his teeth. "That's what I'm talking about. When do you start?" 2 weeks. August 3rd. 2 weeks. Jackson's grin faltered slightly. "Damn. Gonna miss you, Reed. You're one of the good ones." "I'm gonna miss this too," Marcus said, and was surprised to realize he meant it. The construction site had been brutal and exhausting and had slowly destroyed his body, but it had also given him a paycheck when he'd needed one, had taught him that he could endure more than he thought possible, had introduced him to people like Jackson and Danny Chen, who treated him with dignity even when he was hauling rebar in the August heat. "Don't miss it too much," Jackson said. "You're meant for better things than breaking your back building other people's dreams. Now get out of here. Go tell your kid. I've got 6 more hours on shift. And I've got 2 guys coming in this afternoon who need work. Go, Reed, start your new life. You earned it." Marcus didn't argue. He grabbed his toolbox from the site office, changed out of his work clothes for the last time, and drove toward Ava's school with his hands trembling on the steering wheel. The clock on his dashboard, still 5 minutes slow, still unfixed, read 12:10. School didn't let out for another 3 hours, but Marcus couldn't wait. He couldn't sit in their small apartment alone with this news. He couldn't do anything except share this moment with the person who mattered most. The school secretary looked surprised when Marcus walked into the office. "Mr. Reed, is everything all right?" "Everything's perfect," Marcus said, and hearing himself say it made him laugh, an uncontrolled sound that came from somewhere deep in his chest where hope had been hiding. "I need to pick up Ava early. Family celebration. The secretary's expression softened into understanding. Let me call her classroom. 5 minutes later, Ava appeared in the office doorway. Her face creased with worry that transformed into confusion when she saw Marcus smiling. Daddy, what's wrong? Nothing's wrong, sweetheart. Come here. Ava approached cautiously, still trying to read the situation, still calibrating her response based on her father's emotional state. Marcus knelt down so they were eye level, his hands on her shoulders. I got the job, he said simply. They called this morning. I start in 2 weeks. Ava's eyes went huge. You got it? Really? Really? She threw herself at him with enough force to knock them both sideways, her arms wrapping around his neck, her face pressed into his shoulder. Marcus felt her shake slightly and realized she was crying, not sad tears, but the kind that came from relief so profound it overwhelmed every other emotion. I told you, Ava said into his shirt. I told you they'd say yes. You did. You absolutely did. Marcus held her tight, aware that the school secretary was politely pretending not to watch this moment. Want to get out of here? Go celebrate? Can we go to Rossi's? Ava pulled back, her face hopeful. Rossi's was a family pizza place 3 blocks from their apartment, the kind of restaurant they'd visited exactly twice in the past year, because it represented the kind of casual luxury they couldn't justify when money was perpetually tight. We can go anywhere you want, Marcus said. Today, we can do anything. They walked out of the school into afternoon sunshine that felt warmer than it had that morning, brighter somehow, like the world had been slightly out of focus and had suddenly sharpened into clarity. In the parking lot, Ava climbed into the Civic and immediately started planning. We have to call Grandma and Mrs. Chen, and can we tell Mrs. Patterson? She'll want to know. And Danny Chen, because he helped you practice for the interview. And slow down, Marcus laughed. We'll tell everyone, but first, let's just sit with this for a minute, okay? Let's just be happy. Ava settled into her seat, her smile so big it looked like it hurt. Okay, we can be happy first. They drove to Rossi's with the windows down, the radio playing something upbeat that Marcus didn't recognize but found himself humming along to anyway. The restaurant was nearly empty during the lunch lull, just a few tables occupied by retirees and shift workers grabbing early dinners. Tony Rossi himself greeted them at the door, his generous frame wrapped in an apron stained with decades of red sauce. Marcus, Ava, what brings you in on a Friday afternoon? Everything okay? Everything's better than okay, Marcus said. Just got offered a new job. We're celebrating. Tony's face split into a grin that revealed his missing molar. That's wonderful. Sit. Anywhere you want. First soda's on the house for the lady. He winked at Ava, who giggled. They chose a booth by the window, the vinyl seats patched with duct tape but clean, the table wobbling slightly until Marcus wedged a folded napkin under the short leg. Ava ordered a Sprite and pepperoni pizza while Marcus got water and told himself he could afford a beer but probably shouldn't because this was Ava's celebration as much as his. Daddy? Ava asked while they waited for their order. What happens now? Like, what changes? Marcus thought about how to answer this, how to explain the transformation that came with steady employment and actual benefits, the psychological shift from survival mode to something approaching security. Well, first thing Monday, I'll give Morrison Construction my 2 weeks' notice. Then I'll do the paperwork for Harland Engineering, background check, drug test, all the boring grown-up stuff. August 3rd, I start the new job. Will you have to wear a suit? Business casual, probably. Slacks and a button-down shirt. I'll need to buy some new clothes. Will you have an office? Probably just a cubicle at first, but my own desk, my own computer. And sweetheart, here's the important part. I'll work Monday through Friday, 8 to 5 o'clock. No weekends, no crazy overtime unless there's a special project. That means I'll be home for dinner every night. I can help with your homework. We can have actual routines. Ava's expression grew thoughtful. And we'll have more money? Marcus nodded. Not rich, but comfortable. You'll get new shoes when you need them, not when the old ones completely fall apart. We can fix the Civic properly. Maybe even think about moving to a better apartment. I like our apartment, Ava said quickly, loyalty to their small space evident in her voice. I like it too, Marcus assured her. But wouldn't it be nice to have a bedroom that doesn't share a wall with the parking lot? Maybe a place with a small yard. Could we get a dog? Marcus laughed. Let's not get ahead of ourselves, but maybe someday. Their pizza arrived steaming and perfect, cheese bubbling, pepperoni curled at the edges the way Ava liked. They ate in comfortable silence for a while, the simple pleasure of hot food and cold drinks elevated by the knowledge that this wouldn't be their last celebration, that they'd finally crossed some invisible threshold into a life where occasional luxuries didn't require financial calculations that kept Marcus awake at night. I need to call Grandma, Marcus said eventually, pulling out his phone. Eleanor answered on the first ring, her voice tight with anticipation. Marcus, I got it, Mom. I start August 3rd. Eleanor's response was immediate and visceral, a sound caught between a laugh and a sob, followed by rapid words that tumbled over each other. Oh, thank goodness. Oh, sweetheart, I'm so proud of you. So incredibly proud. Your father would be... He'd be so... She couldn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. I know, Mom. I know he would. Can I take you and Ava to dinner tomorrow? To celebrate properly? I'll drive down. We can go somewhere nice. My treat. Marcus glanced at Ava, who was listening with naked curiosity. That sounds great, Mom. Ava would love that. Can I talk to her? Marcus handed the phone to Ava, who immediately launched into an excited explanation of their pizza celebration and all the plans she'd been making for their new life. Watching his daughter's animated gestures, hearing her voice bright with uncomplicated joy, Marcus felt something settle in his chest. A tension he'd been carrying for so long he'd forgotten it was there until it finally released. After Ava returned the phone, Marcus called Mrs. Chen, then sent texts to Danny and to Jackson. Each person's response carried genuine happiness, the kind that came from witnessing someone escape a situation they'd been trapped in through no fault of their own. Marcus hadn't realized how many people had been quietly rooting for him until they all responded with variations of finally and about time and you deserved this years ago. But one person remained, the person whose intervention had made this possible. Marcus pulled out Evelyn Cross's business card, now worn from living in his wallet for 3 days, and texted, Got the job. Start August 3rd. I don't know how to thank you properly, but I want you to know you changed my daughter's life today. The response came quickly. You changed your daughter's life by being exactly who you are. I just opened a door. You walked through it. Congratulations, Marcus. You earned this. Marcus showed the message to Ava. That's the woman whose car I fixed. She's the one who made them interview me again. Can we send her a thank you card? Mrs. Patterson says thank you cards are important. I think that's a perfect idea. They finished their pizza and Marcus paid the bill, leaving Tony a tip that was probably too generous but felt necessary, like he needed to spread this windfall of good fortune before it evaporated. Outside, the afternoon had shifted into early evening, the sun lower and gentler, casting everything in golden light that felt metaphorically appropriate. At home, Ava immediately began crafting a thank you card using construction paper, markers, and enough glitter to qualify as a biohazard. Marcus watched her work while he responded to more congratulatory texts, fielded a call from a former classmate who'd heard the news through some mysterious professional grapevine, and tried to wrap his mind around the fact that Monday morning he'd give notice at a job that had sustained him, but slowly destroyed him. Daddy, how do you spell gratitude? Ava asked, her tongue caught between her teeth in concentration. Marcus spelled it out, watching her carefully form each letter. The card was excessive and beautiful, flowers and hearts and stars, Ava's signature artistic maximalism on full display. She wrote in her careful script, Dear Ms. Cross, thank you for helping my daddy. You have gratitude from both of us. Our family is going to be okay now because you were kind. Love, Ava Reed. P.S. My daddy is the best person I know, and you helped him prove it. That's perfect, sweetheart, Marcus said, his throat tight. Should we mail it tomorrow? Definitely. That evening, Marcus made a dinner that was special only because they approached it without the usual undercurrent of anxiety about grocery money or whether they'd have enough leftovers for tomorrow's lunch. He made spaghetti with meat sauce, garlic bread from the bakery instead of frozen, and a salad with actual fresh vegetables. Ava set the table with elaborate care, folding napkins into triangles and arranging the mismatched plates like they were fine china. Daddy, she asked while they ate, Are you scared about the new job? Marcus considered lying, offering some sanitized version of confidence he didn't entirely feel, but Ava deserved honesty. A little scared, yeah. It's been a long time since I worked in an office, and I'll be starting over, learning new systems, proving myself to new people. That's always scary. But you're smart enough, right? I think so. I hope so. You are, Ava said with finality. And even if it's hard at first, you'll figure it out. You always figure things out. Her faith in him was simultaneously comforting and terrifying. Marcus had spent years trying to shield Ava from his doubts and fears, constructing a facade of parental confidence even when he felt like he was drowning. But apparently, she'd seen through that facade and had decided to believe in him anyway. After dinner, they walked to the small park 3 blocks from their apartment. The playground was dated and slightly dangerous, but Ava loved the swing set, and tonight Marcus pushed her higher than usual, listening to her laughter echo across the empty space. The sun set in layers of pink and orange, and the air cooled into something almost comfortable. "Higher!" Ava called, her legs pumping, her hair streaming behind her. Marcus pushed harder, watching his daughter arc toward the darkening sky, and felt something crystallize in his chest. This moment, this simple, perfect moment, was what every sacrifice had been for. Every late night, every humiliating compromise, every time he'd swallowed his pride or pushed through pain or made choices that destroyed his own prospects to protect hers. It had all been leading to this: a Friday evening in a rundown park with his daughter laughing on a rusty swing set, both of them finally believing that their future might be better than their past. Later, after Ava was asleep and Marcus sat alone at the kitchen table with Harlan Engineering's offer letter open on his laptop, he allowed himself to fully comprehend what had happened. $48,000. Benefits, paid vacation, a career path instead of just a job. The chance to use his education to prove that the 6 years he'd spent in survival mode hadn't erased his potential. His phone buzzed with one final message for the day. Evelyn Cross. Received Ava's card. It's on my office desk. Thank you both. Also, I own several buildings that need engineering consultation for renovation projects. If Harlan allows outside contracts once you're settled, I'd like to work with you. Not charity, business. You're good at what you do, Marcus. Marcus read the message 3 times, each time finding new layers of meaning. She wasn't done helping him. She was offering more than just the job. She was offering connections, opportunities, the kind of professional network that people spend entire careers building. And she'd framed it as business, not charity, because she understood that he needed to earn his success, not have it handed to him. He typed back, "I'd be honored. Thank you for believing in me when I'd almost stopped believing in myself." The response was immediate. "You never stopped believing. You just got tired. There's a difference." Marcus closed his laptop and walked to Ava's bedroom, standing in the doorway watching her sleep. She'd kicked off her covers as usual, one arm flung above her head, her face peaceful in the way only children's faces could be. Tomorrow, Eleanor would drive down for celebration dinner. Sunday, they'd mail Ava's card to Evelyn. Monday, Marcus would give notice at Morrison Construction and begin the 2-week countdown to transformation. But tonight, he just stood and watched his daughter breathe, this small person who'd been his reason for everything, who'd kept him moving forward when forward seemed impossible. She'd been right this morning. She'd known with her 8-year-old certainty that today would change their lives. Marcus hadn't let himself believe it because belief felt dangerous when you'd been disappointed so many times before. But Ava had believed enough for both of them, and she'd been right. She'd been absolutely right. Marcus pulled her covers back over her small frame, kissed her forehead gently, and whispered into the darkness of her room, "We're going to be okay, baby girl. We're actually going to be okay." And for the first time in 6 years, he believed it. The 2 weeks between acceptance and starting felt simultaneously endless and terrifyingly brief. Marcus moved through them in a state of cautious optimism, like someone who'd won the lottery but hadn't yet cashed the ticket, afraid that some clerical error would reveal the whole thing had been a mistake. He completed the background check at a facility downtown where fluorescent lights hummed and a bored technician swabbed his cheek for DNA. He took the drug test at a clinic that smelled like antiseptic and fear, his urine sample proving what he already knew, that his body contained nothing but exhaustion and hope and too much caffeine. The paperwork arrived via email in dense, bureaucratic language that Marcus read 3 times to make sure he understood every clause, every commitment, every promise Harlan Engineering was making. Health insurance that actually covered things. Dental. Vision. A 401k with employer matching that felt like science fiction after years of living paycheck to paycheck with no thought for any future beyond next month's rent. Eleanor drove down that Saturday, as promised, arriving in her sensible sedan that she kept immaculately clean, a trait Marcus had inherited but couldn't maintain given the construction dust that permeated everything he owned. She hugged him at the door with an intensity that spoke of years of worry finally releasing, then turned her attention to Ava with the focused devotion grandmothers reserve for grandchildren who'd survived hardship alongside their parents. "You look beautiful, sweet girl," Eleanor said, straightening Ava's collar unnecessarily. "Are you ready for a fancy dinner?" "Grandma, can we go somewhere with cloth napkins?" Ava asked. "Daddy says fancy places have cloth napkins instead of paper." "Cloth napkins it is," Eleanor agreed, her eyes meeting Marcus's over Ava's head with an expression that said everything they couldn't articulate, pride and relief and gratitude that they'd survived the worst years and emerged intact. They went to Bellini's, an Italian restaurant that occupied converted warehouse space in the Arts District, the kind of place Marcus had driven past hundreds of times but never imagined entering. The interior was all exposed brick and warm lighting, tables covered with white linens, the scent of garlic and fresh bread creating an atmosphere that felt like celebration personified. Eleanor ordered wine, something red and expensive that made Marcus wince at the price until she waved away his concern. "Tonight, we're not worrying about prices," she said firmly. "Tonight, we're acknowledging that my son accomplished something remarkable, and we're grateful." Ava ordered pasta with butter sauce, her usual safe choice, but tonight she tried calamari when it arrived as an appetizer, her face cycling through uncertainty and surprise before settling on cautious approval. Marcus watched his daughter navigate this unfamiliar culinary territory and saw Sarah in her expressions, that same adventurous spirit wrapped in careful consideration. "Tell me about the job," Eleanor said once they'd ordered. "What will you actually be doing?" Marcus had studied the position description until he could recite it verbatim. "Junior engineering support, primarily. I'll be assisting senior engineers with structural assessments, reviewing blueprints, running calculations, preparing reports. Basically everything I learned in technical school, plus everything I've learned in construction, just applied in an office setting instead of in the field." Will you miss the construction work?" Eleanor asked, and Marcus could hear the real question underneath. Would he miss the physicality, the immediate gratification of building tangible things, the camaraderie of men who worked with their hands? "I'll miss some of it," Marcus admitted. "I'll miss Jackson and Danny Chen and the way you can see what you've accomplished at the end of each day. But I won't miss my back hurting all the time. I won't miss coming home too exhausted to help Ava with homework. I won't miss the fear that one injury could end my ability to earn a living." "Daddy almost fell off a scaffold last month," Ava offered conversationally, and Marcus shot her a look that promised they'd discuss appropriate dinner conversation topics later. "Ava, it's fine," Eleanor interrupted, her face pale but controlled. "Marcus, you almost fell off a scaffold?" "The safety harness caught me. It was barely an incident." "An incident is when something happens. You almost falling off a scaffold is a catastrophe narrowly avoided." Eleanor set down her wine glass with deliberate precision. "I'm glad you're leaving construction. I should have said that immediately. I'm very glad you're getting out before your luck runs out." The dinner proceeded with lighter conversation. Ava's upcoming school year, Eleanor's garden that was producing more tomatoes than one person could reasonably consume, the vacation they might take next summer when Marcus had accrued enough time off. Eleanor insisted on paying despite Marcus's protests, and they left the restaurant full and satisfied in ways that transcended mere food. Driving home, Ava fell asleep in the back seat, her head pillowed against the window, worn out from excitement and pasta. Eleanor followed them to the apartment, helped carry Ava inside, and waited while Marcus tucked his daughter into bed still wearing her dinner clothes, because waking her seemed cruel. "You're a good father," Eleanor said softly from the doorway of Ava's bedroom. "I don't say that enough. You're exactly the kind of father your dad was. I'm trying to be, Marcus said, adjusting Ava's blanket one more time. Most days I feel like I'm just barely keeping it together. That's what parenting is. Barely keeping it together while pretending you know what you're doing. Eleanor moved into the kitchen, automatically filling the kettle for tea the way she did in her own home. Your father used to tell me he felt like an imposter, like eventually someone would realize he had no idea how to raise a child and would take you away from us. Marcus had never heard this before. His memories of his father were dominated by competence and quiet strength, a man who'd seemed certain about everything. Dad felt that way? Every parent feels that way. We're all just making it up as we go along, hoping we don't damage our children too badly. Eleanor found mugs in the cabinet, mismatched, chipped, the accumulated detritus of years living on a budget that didn't allow for replacing things that still functioned. But you, Marcus, you've done more than just avoid damage. You've raised a remarkable child under circumstances that would have broken most people. Sarah did most of the hard work before. Marcus couldn't finish that sentence. Still couldn't casually reference his wife's death even though 4 years had passed. Sarah loved you both fiercely, Eleanor agreed. But she's been gone 4 years, and in that time you've been mother and father both. You've kept Ava fed and sheltered and loved and hopeful. That's not nothing. That's everything. They sat at the small kitchen table with their tea, and Eleanor pulled out an envelope from her purse. I want you to have this. Don't argue, just listen first. Marcus opened the envelope to find a check for $5,000, an amount so large in their current economy that his first instinct was to hand it back. Mom, I can't. You can and you will, Eleanor interrupted. Your father had life insurance. Not much, but enough. I've been living on my pension and his Social Security, and I don't need this money. But you do. You need work clothes for your new job. Ava needs new shoes that aren't held together with hope and cardboard. Your car needs proper repairs instead of temporary fixes. And you need a buffer, Marcus. You need to not be living one emergency away from catastrophe. Marcus stared at the check, his vision blurring slightly. This is too much. It's not nearly enough. If I could give you back the 4 years you spent struggling, I would. But I can't, so I'm giving you this instead. Take it. Use it. Let me help. Thank you, Marcus managed, his voice rough. I don't know what else to say except thank you. Say you'll keep me updated on how you're doing. Say you'll let me help more often instead of always trying to do everything alone. Say you'll remember that you're not in this by yourself. Eleanor reached across the table, covering his hand with hers. You have people who love you, Marcus. Let us love you. After Eleanor left, Marcus sat alone at the kitchen table with the check in front of him, doing calculations in his head. $5,000 meant breathing room. It meant fixing the Civic properly instead of nursing it along. It meant buying Ava new school clothes without guilt. It meant having an emergency fund for the first time in years. It meant that the universe had decided to give him not just one break, but multiple breaks. And he wasn't sure what he'd done to deserve this sudden reversal of fortune except stop to help a stranger on an empty road. Sunday they mailed Ava's thank you card to Evelyn Cross's office address. Ava insisting on buying the special sparkle envelope that cost an extra $1 because important people deserve sparkle. Marcus didn't argue. They spent the afternoon at the second-hand store where Marcus found 3 button-down shirts and 2 pairs of slacks that looked almost new, probably donated by some corporate worker who'd upgraded his wardrobe. The total came to $43, a fraction of what new clothes would have cost, and Marcus felt the thrill of bargain hunting that had become survival skill over the past years. That evening, while Ava worked on a puzzle at the coffee table, Marcus called Jackson to confirm he'd be in Monday to give formal notice. The site manager's voice was gruff but understanding. Figured you'd be calling soon. Got your replacement already lined up. Danny's cousin needs work, and I promised Mrs. Chen I'd take care of family. 2 weeks enough time? Marcus asked. 2 weeks is plenty. Hell, Reed, I could let you go tomorrow if you wanted. No point dragging it out when you've got something better waiting. I want to finish properly. Train whoever's taking my spot. Leave things right. That's why you're too good for this place, Jackson said, not unkindly. All right, come in Monday. We'll make it official. But I'm telling you now, the crew's going to be pissed to lose you. You're one of the good ones. Monday morning, Marcus woke at 5 as usual, muscle memory overriding the fact that today marked the beginning of an ending. He dressed in his work clothes, made Ava breakfast, and arrived at the construction site for what would begin his final 2 weeks of manual labor. The sun was just breaking over the skeletal frame of the building they'd been erecting for months, painting steel beams in shades of orange and gold. Jackson was waiting in the site office with coffee and the necessary paperwork. Marcus signed the resignation letter, his handwriting careful on the official form that marked his departure from this chapter of his life. 2 weeks' notice. Last day, August 2nd. Reason for leaving. Accepted position elsewhere. "You're really doing it," Jackson said, reviewing the paperwork. "Getting out before this job kills you. Was it that obvious I was dying here? Reed, every morning you walked in here moving like you were 80 years old. Every afternoon you left looking like you'd aged another decade. Yeah, it was obvious." Jackson filed the paperwork. "But you never complained, never called in sick, never cut corners. That's why I'm happy you're leaving. You actually deserve better than this." The crew reacted to his announcement with the kind of ribbing that masked genuine affection. Danny Chen punched his shoulder and accused him of abandoning them for the easy life. Tommy Garcia, who'd been hoping Marcus might recommend him for any openings, congratulated him with only a hint of envy. Even the older guys who'd been doing construction work since before Marcus was born acknowledged that getting out while he still could was the smart move. "Just don't forget where you came from," Rodriguez said, a veteran of 30 years who'd watched countless young guys cycle through construction on their way to other careers. "Don't become one of those office types who looks down on the people who build their buildings." "Never," Marcus promised, and meant it absolutely. The 2 weeks passed in a blur of final projects and training sessions with Danny's cousin Miguel, a 22-year-old who reminded Marcus of himself at that age, ambitious, hardworking, convinced that construction was temporary until life forced him to recalibrate his expectations. Marcus showed him the efficient ways to stack materials, the shortcuts that save time without sacrificing safety, the unwritten rules about which site managers were reasonable and which were tyrants to avoid. "How long you been doing this?" Miguel asked on Marcus's second-to-last day. 4 years. Feels like 40. "And now you're going to an office?" "Engineering firm, using my degree, finally." Miguel nodded thoughtfully. "Think I could do that? Engineering?" Marcus studied the younger man, seeing echoes of his own abandoned dreams. "You could do anything if you're willing to sacrifice for it. Question is what you're willing to sacrifice and whether it's worth what you get in return." "That's not really an answer. It's the only answer I've got." On his final day, the crew took Marcus to their usual lunch spot, a taco truck that parked 3 blocks from the site and served food that was cheap, fast, and surprisingly good. Jackson bought Marcus's lunch and made a brief speech that was more embarrassing than touching, thanking him for his work and wishing him well in his new career. The other guys contributed a card they'd all signed, along with a gift certificate to a men's clothing store that would help him build his office wardrobe. "You're going to knock them dead at that fancy job," Danny said, his voice thick with emotion. "And when you're running that company someday, maybe you'll remember the little people who knew you when." "I'm not going to be running anything," Marcus protested. "I'm starting as a junior engineer." "Yeah, but you won't stay junior long. You're too smart for that." Marcus spent his final afternoon organizing the tool room, a task nobody had asked him to do, but that felt necessary, leaving things cleaner than he'd found them, passing along whatever small improvements he could to the people who'd remain after he left. At 4:30, he turned in his hard hat and safety vest, shook hands with Jackson one final time, and walked to his truck knowing he'd never return to this site, to this life, to this version of himself that had survived through sheer endurance. Ava was waiting when he got home, her face eager with anticipation. "Is it over? Are you done?" "I'm done," Marcus confirmed. "Tomorrow, I'm an engineer." "How do you feel?" Marcus considered the question seriously. How did he feel? Relieved, certainly. Grateful, absolutely. But also strangely melancholic, like he was saying goodbye to more than just a job, saying goodbye to the version of himself who'd proven he could survive anything, who'd endured pain and humiliation and exhaustion because his daughter needed him to. That version of Marcus had been necessary, had served its purpose, but it had also been slowly killing him. "I feel ready," he said finally. I feel like it's time. That evening, they celebrated with dinner from the Chinese restaurant down the street. Orange chicken and fried rice and egg rolls, simple food made special by circumstance. Ava presented Marcus with a card she'd made at school, crayon drawings of buildings with him standing in front wearing what looked like a cape, but she insisted was a tie. My teacher said I could share with the class about your new job, Ava said proudly. I told everyone my dad is the smartest person I know, and he's going to build important things. Marcus felt his chest tighten. What did your teacher say? She said I should be very proud of you, and I said I am. I'm the most proud ever. They went to bed early that night, both of them understanding that tomorrow marked a threshold they'd been approaching for weeks, but could now finally cross. Marcus laid out his new clothes, one of the second-hand button-downs, the slacks he'd had hemmed at the dry cleaner for $8, the dress shoes Eleanor had insisted on buying him despite his protests, professional clothes for a professional job, a costume for the new role he'd be playing. He set his alarm for 6 o'clock a.m., an hour earlier than necessary, wanting to give himself time to adjust to this new rhythm. But sleep was elusive, his mind cycling through scenarios and possibilities. What if he couldn't remember the engineering principles he'd learned a decade ago? What if everyone else was younger, better educated, more naturally talented? What if he'd oversold his abilities and they discovered within days that he was a fraud, a construction worker in engineer's clothing? Around midnight, his phone buzzed with a text from Evelyn Cross. Tomorrow's your first day. Nervous is normal. Capable is what matters. You've got this. Marcus typed back. How did you know I was awake? Because I remember my first day in business. Barely slept. Spent the whole night convinced I'd fail. 20 years later, I'm still here. You will be too. Thank you for the vote of confidence. It's not confidence, Marcus. It's observation. I watched you solve a problem calmly under pressure while sacrificing something important to help a stranger. That's the kind of person who succeeds. Sleep well. See you on the other side. Marcus read the message several times, letting her certainty seep into his own uncertainty. She believed in him. Jennifer Morrison believed in him. Jackson and Danny and even Rodriguez believed in him. His mother believed in him. Most importantly, Ava believed in him with the absolute faith only children could muster. Maybe it was time he believed in himself. Monday morning arrived with crisp sunshine and temperatures that promised another scorching summer day. Marcus showered carefully, shaved with the same precision Eleanor had taught him years ago, and dressed in his new clothes with movements that felt ceremonial. The button-down fit well, the slacks were slightly loose but professional, the shoes were stiff but would break in with time. He stood before the bathroom mirror studying his reflection, a man who looked like he might belong in an office, who might be capable of professional work, who might have earned this opportunity through means other than luck. You look like a real engineer, Ava announced from the doorway, her voice filled with awe. I look like I'm playing dress-up, Marcus corrected. No, you look like someone important, like someone who knows things. Ava approached and straightened his collar unnecessarily. Are you scared? Terrified. That's okay. Mom used to say being scared means you care about something enough to worry about losing it. Marcus pulled his daughter into a tight hug, breathing in the familiar scent of her shampoo and child sweetness. When did you get so wise? I've always been wise. You just didn't notice because you were too busy being sad. The casual observation hit harder than intended. Marcus pulled back to look at Ava's face, seeing the old soul understanding in her eyes. Was I that obvious? You were sad all the time after Mom died, but then you got less sad. And now you're mostly just tired and worried, which is better than sad. Ava said this with clinical assessment that made her sound much older than 8. But I think after today you might be happy sometimes. Real happy, not pretend happy. Marcus kissed her forehead. I think you might be right. He dropped Ava at Mrs. Chen's apartment, the usual morning routine that would continue until Marcus could afford proper after-school care, and drove downtown through rush-hour traffic that felt different now that he was part of it. He was commuting. He was a commuter. He was joining the river of people flowing toward office buildings and professional obligations, no longer an outsider who looked at this world from construction sites. The Meridian Tower lobby felt less intimidating than it had 2 weeks ago, though Marcus's heart still hammered as he approached the security desk. The guard checked his ID against a list, nodded approval, and handed him a temporary badge that would be replaced with a permanent one after he completed orientation. "Fourth floor, Mr. Reed. Welcome to Harland Engineering." The elevator ride felt faster than remembered. The fourth floor reception area was bustling with Monday morning energy. People carrying coffee, conversations about weekend activities, the organized chaos of a workplace coming to life. The receptionist smiled with genuine warmth. "Marcus Reed, we've been expecting you. Jennifer will be right out to collect you for orientation." Marcus stood awkwardly near the desk, his new badge clipped to his shirt, feeling simultaneously visible and invisible in the way new employees always did. Around him, Harlan's staff moved with comfortable familiarity, navigating their space with the unconscious ease of people who belonged. He wondered how long it would take before he moved that way too, before this office felt like his territory rather than foreign land he was visiting. Jennifer Morrison appeared exactly on time, her professional warmth immediately putting Marcus at ease. "Right on time. Excellent start. Ready for your first day?" "As ready as I'll ever be," Marcus admitted. "Honest answer. I appreciate that." Jennifer led him through the office, pointing out key locations: restrooms, break room, supply closet, conference rooms. The space was open concept with cubicles arranged in clusters, natural light streaming through large windows, everything designed to facilitate collaboration and productivity. "Your desk is in the junior engineering cluster. You'll be working primarily with Robert Chen and Maya Patel, both senior engineers who will be your mentors for the first few months." She introduced Marcus to what felt like dozens of people, each offering friendly welcomes that he knew he'd never remember. Names and faces blurred together in his nervousness, but the overall impression was positive. People seemed genuinely glad to have him joining the team rather than resentful of new competition. His desk was sparse but functional: computer, phone, ergonomic chair that probably cost more than all the furniture in his apartment combined. A welcome packet waited on the keyboard, along with a small succulent in a ceramic pot and a note. "Welcome to the team. This plant is almost impossible to kill," which seemed appropriate for your first day. The Harland Engineering staff. Marcus sat down carefully, testing the chair's adjustment mechanisms, logging into his computer with the credentials Jennifer provided. His email inbox populated with system messages and welcome notes. His calendar showed meetings already scheduled, orientation sessions, team introductions, training blocks. This was real. This was happening. This was his life now. "Marcus?" A woman appeared beside his desk, probably late 20s, with bright eyes and an easy smile. "I'm Maya Patel, one of your senior engineers. Welcome aboard. Let me show you how we organize our project files before orientation starts." The morning passed in a blur of information: software tutorials, protocol explanations, project management systems, safety procedures that felt absurd compared to construction site safety, until Maya explained that engineering mistakes could kill people just as surely as falling from scaffolding. Marcus absorbed everything he could, taking notes in a pocket notebook he'd bought specifically for this purpose, asking questions when concepts weren't clear, trying to project competence while feeling completely overwhelmed. At noon, Robert Chen, no relation to Mrs. Chen or Danny, apparently the name was common, invited Marcus to join him and Maya for lunch in the building's cafeteria. The space was modern and pleasant, offering pre-made salads and sandwiches that cost twice what the taco truck charged, but came with the convenience of not leaving the building. "So what brought you to engineering?" Robert asked once they'd settled at a table near the windows. Marcus had prepared for this question, had practiced his answer until it sounded natural rather than rehearsed. "I started technical school years ago, but had to leave for family reasons. Spent some time in construction, which actually gave me practical perspective on structural issues. When this opportunity came up, it felt like the right time to use my education properly." "Construction experience is valuable," Maya said. "A lot of engineers design things without understanding how they're actually built. Having someone who's worked in the field will help us avoid impractical specifications." They discussed ongoing projects, office dynamics, the learning curve Marcus should expect. Both senior engineers were generous with advice and encouragement, treating him like a colleague rather than an inferior. By the time lunch ended, Marcus felt fractionally less terrified, though the imposter syndrome hummed quietly beneath his surface confidence. The afternoon brought more training, more introductions, more systems to learn. At 4:30, Jennifer Morrison stopped by his desk with a smile. "Survived your first day?" "Barely," Marcus admitted. "My brain is completely full." "That's normal. Give it a week before everything starts making sense. Give it a month before you feel competent. Give it 3 months before you forget what it felt like to be new." Jennifer handed him a folder. "Your benefits paperwork. Fill it out tonight. Bring it back tomorrow." "And Marcus, you did well today. I've seen a lot of new hires, and the ones who ask questions instead of pretending they know everything are always the ones who succeed." Marcus drove home through rush hour traffic that no longer felt foreign, just tedious. His body was exhausted in a completely different way than construction exhaustion, mental rather than physical. The fatigue of concentration and new information rather than the fatigue of broken muscles and strained joints. But it was a good exhaustion, the kind that came from using his mind fully for the first time in years. Ava was waiting at the apartment window when Marcus pulled into the parking lot, her face pressed against the glass. She flung open the door before he could even get his key out. "How was it? Tell me everything. Did you build anything? Did people like you? Were you the smartest one there?" Marcus laughed, scooping her into a hug. "It was good, sweetheart. Really good. I didn't build anything yet. Mostly just learned how everything works. And I definitely wasn't the smartest one there, but I think I'm smart enough." "That's all you need to be," Ava said seriously. "Smart enough and kind enough. That's what Mom always said." They made dinner together, grilled cheese and tomato soup, comfort food that celebrated ordinariness. Ava told him about her day while Marcus half listened, his mind still processing the overwhelming amount of new information he'd absorbed. But he was present enough, engaged enough, home at a reasonable hour for the first time in 4 years. After Ava went to bed, Marcus sat at the kitchen table with his benefits paperwork, carefully selecting health insurance options and designating beneficiaries. Every form felt like proof that this was real, that he'd actually made the transition from survival mode to something approaching stability. He filled out direct deposit information, emergency contacts, the tax withholding forms that would determine how much of his paycheck he'd actually see. His phone buzzed. "Evelyn Cross. Heard from Jennifer that you had a strong first day. Told you that you'd be fine." Marcus smiled. "Does Jennifer report to you about all new hires?" "Only the ones I'm personally invested in. How does it feel?" "Like I'm dreaming and terrified I'll wake up." "You're not dreaming. You earned this. Now stop doubting yourself and enjoy it." "Yes, ma'am." Marcus climbed into bed that night feeling the same exhaustion he'd felt after construction shifts, but recognizing it was different in character and meaning. Tomorrow he'd go back. And the day after that. And the day after that. He'd build competence through repetition, prove his value through performance, transform from the new guy into simply another engineer doing good work. The last thought before sleep took him was of Sarah, wondering if she could see him now, if she understood that every sacrifice he'd made had led to this moment. He hoped she did. He hoped she was proud. He hoped she knew that their daughter would be okay, that they'd be okay, that stopping to help a stranger on an empty road had somehow unlocked a future Marcus had stopped believing was possible. And tomorrow he'd wake up and do it all again, building his new life one day at a time, the same way he'd survived the worst years, through persistence and hope and the unshakable belief that his daughter deserved a father who never stopped trying to be better. 3 months passed with the peculiar velocity of significant change, each day feeling interminable while the weeks themselves vanished like water through cupped hands. Marcus settled into the rhythm of office life with the same determination he'd brought to construction work, arriving 15 minutes early each morning and staying late when projects demanded it. The learning curve had been steep, occasionally brutal, but he discovered that construction experience translated into engineering insight in ways his formally educated colleagues couldn't replicate. When Maya designed support structures that looked perfect on paper but would be nightmares to actually build, Marcus could explain why. When Robert calculated loads without considering how weather would affect materials during installation, Marcus knew to flag the oversight. His value became apparent gradually, then suddenly. By October, Jennifer was assigning him to client meetings where his ability to translate engineering concepts into practical construction language proved invaluable, By November, senior partners were specifically requesting his input on renovation projects where existing structures needed assessment. Marcus stopped feeling like an imposter sometime around Thanksgiving, though he couldn't identify the exact moment when competence had replaced anxiety. The financial transformation felt equally surreal. Marcus's first paycheck, actual take-home after taxes and benefits, had been $2,800, more money than he'd seen in a single deposit in years. He'd stared at his bank balance for a full minute, convinced there'd been an error, before the reality settled in. This was his life now. This was what stability looked like. He'd bought Ava new shoes without calculating whether it meant sacrificing something else. He'd fixed the Civic properly, replacing parts that had been held together with hope and mechanical improvisation. He'd paid off the overdue bills that had accumulated like debt barnacles on a sinking ship. And slowly, carefully, he'd begun saving, $50 each paycheck at first, then $100, building the emergency fund that would mean the next crisis wouldn't destroy everything they'd rebuilt. Ava flourished in ways that made Marcus's chest ache with grateful recognition. She joined the school's art club, something they couldn't have afforded when fees meant choosing between activities and groceries. She started piano lessons with a teacher Mrs. Chen had recommended, her small fingers learning to coax music from keys with the same determination she brought to everything. She smiled more easily, laughed more freely, no longer carrying the quiet worry of a child who understood too well how fragile their security had been. Eleanor visited monthly now instead of quarterly, the 3-hour drive feeling less burdensome when she didn't have to spend the entire visit worrying about Marcus's survival. She'd softened in ways Marcus hadn't seen since before his father died, as though his success had finally given her permission to stop bracing for catastrophe. During her October visit, she'd admitted something that had stunned him. "I was so angry at you for stopping to help that woman," Eleanor had said over coffee while Ava was at school. "I thought you'd thrown away your last chance at stability for a stranger who'd forget your name by dinner. But watching how things unfolded, watching you earn this opportunity through simple decency, it reminded me why I married your father. He would have stopped too, and he would have been right to stop, just like you were." Marcus had hugged his mother then, both of them crying quietly in his small kitchen, releasing years of accumulated fear and frustration and grief. They'd lost so much. Eleanor, her husband, Marcus, his wife, both of them years they couldn't reclaim. But they'd survived. They'd endured. And now, finally, they could stop just surviving and start actually living. In late November, 3 weeks before Christmas, Marcus received an email that made him read it twice to ensure he'd understood correctly. Evelyn Cross's assistant was requesting a meeting to discuss potential consulting opportunities on several renovation projects Cross Real Estate Holdings was planning. The email was professional, formal, making clear this was business rather than charity. 3 buildings needed structural assessment before renovation could begin. Would Mr. Reed be available to provide engineering consultation? Compensation would be competitive with industry standards. Marcus forwarded the email to Jennifer Morrison with a note. "Is this something I'm allowed to do? I don't want to violate any employment policies." Jennifer's response came within an hour. "You're allowed to take outside consulting work as long as it doesn't interfere with Harlan projects and doesn't create conflicts of interest. This sounds like a great opportunity. I'll need to approve the specific arrangements to ensure there's no overlap with our current clients. But in principle, yes, you can do this. Congratulations." Marcus called Evelyn that evening after Ava was asleep, his heart hammering with nervous excitement. She answered on the second ring, her voice warm and familiar despite the months since they'd last spoken. "Marcus, I was hoping you'd call rather than just emailing back through my assistant. I wanted to make sure this was really what it seems like, that you actually need engineering consultation and aren't just creating work for me." Evelyn laughed, the sound genuine. "Marcus, I own 37 buildings in this city. At any given time, at least a dozen need some form of renovation or structural assessment. I've been using various engineering firms for years, paying ridiculous fees to people who don't communicate well with contractors. When Jennifer mentioned you'd been impressing clients with your ability to bridge engineering and construction perspectives, I thought, why not work with someone I know is competent and trustworthy?" "I've only been doing this 3 months, Marcus protested. "There are engineers with decades more experience, and most of them have never actually built anything. They design in theoretical vacuums and get angry when contractors point out their plans won't work in reality. You've done both. That's rare and valuable. Evelyn's tone shifted to business efficiency. 3 buildings, full structural assessment before renovation. I need to know what we're working with, what's safe to modify, where we need reinforcement, standard consultation rates, which my assistant will formalize in a contract. Interested? Very interested, Marcus said, trying to keep his voice professional despite wanting to shout agreement. When do you need me to start? After the holidays, no rush. These are long-term projects. Evelyn paused. How are you doing, Marcus? Really doing? The question caught him off guard with its intimacy. I'm good. Better than I've been in years. Ava's thriving. Work is challenging but satisfying. We're actually okay now. I'm glad. You deserved a break. Another pause. Listen, I'm having a small holiday gathering for business associates in mid-December. Nothing formal, just drinks and conversation. I'd like you to come. Networking opportunity. Meet some people who might have use for your skills down the line. Marcus's first instinct was to decline, to retreat into the safety of his small world where he knew the rules and expectations. But Sarah's voice echoed in his memory, something she'd said during their early dating years. Growth only happens outside comfort zones. He'd been living in his comfort zone for 4 years, and comfort zones didn't lead to consulting opportunities or expanded professional networks. I'd be honored, Marcus said. Thank you for the invitation. Good. I'll have my assistant send details. And Marcus, bring Ava if you want. I know finding childcare for evening events can be complicated, and I'd love to meet her properly. After the call ended, Marcus sat in the quiet apartment feeling something shift in his chest. Not quite peace, but close to it. 6 months ago, he'd been hauling rebar and living paycheck to paycheck, convinced his life had peaked in his early 20s and everything since had been managed decline. Now he had a career that used his education, a consulting opportunity that recognized his unique skill set, and an invitation to network with people who owned buildings and made decisions that shaped the city. The impossibility of it still struck him sometimes, usually late at night when his mind refused to settle. How had stopping to help a stranger resulted in this cascade of opportunity? How had 3 minutes of basic human decency unlocked doors he'd believed were permanently sealed? The logical part of his brain insisted it wasn't that simple, that his competence and work ethic and technical skills had earned these opportunities. But the part of him that still believed in something beyond pure materialism wondered if the universe occasionally rewarded people for choosing right over easy, kindness over convenience. He told Ava about this consulting work over breakfast the next morning, watching her face light up with pride that felt disproportionate to the actual achievement, but perfectly calibrated to a daughter's love. Does this mean you're really successful now? Ava asked, her spoon pausing halfway to her mouth. It means I'm doing well, Marcus corrected gently. Success is a long journey, not a single destination. That sounds like something Grandma would say. Grandma says a lot of wise things. But you're happy, right? You're not just pretending for me? Marcus reached across the table, taking his daughter's small hand in his scarred, calloused one that was slowly softening from office work. I'm happy, sweetheart. Really, genuinely happy. And a lot of that is because you believed in me even when I'd stopped believing in myself. Ava squeezed his hand. That's what families do. We believe in each other. The consulting contract arrived via email 2 days later, dense with legal language that Marcus read 3 times before signing. The compensation was extraordinary, $15,000 per building assessment, $45,000 total, to be paid in installments as he completed various phases of evaluation. The number felt surreal, nearly equivalent to his entire annual salary from construction work, for what amounted to maybe 3 months of part-time consultation. He called Eleanor that evening, needing to share the news with someone who'd understand what this represented. Mom, I just signed a consulting contract with Evelyn Cross. $45,000 for structural assessments on 3 buildings. The silence on the other end lasted long enough that Marcus thought the call had dropped. Then Eleanor's voice came through, thick with emotion. Marcus, that's incredible. That's more money than your father made in his best year. I know. I keep thinking there's been a mistake, that someone's going to call and say they meant $4,500, not $45,000. No mistake, sweetheart. Just the world finally recognizing what you're capable of. Eleanor's voice steadied. Your father would be so proud. I wish he could see this. Me too, Mom. Me too. December arrived with unseasonable warmth, the kind of weather that made climate scientists nervous and children delighted. Ava's school prepared for winter concerts and holiday parties, activities Marcus could now attend without calculating whether missing work hours would mean insufficient grocery money. He bought Christmas presents in November, actual thoughtful gifts rather than clearance items purchased at the last moment. He found a beautiful necklace for Ava, a small silver pendant shaped like a star, something she'd admired in a store window months ago, but never asked for because she'd learned too young not to want things they couldn't afford. For Eleanor, he bought a photography book about gardens, knowing his mother spent hours cultivating her small plot of earth with the focused devotion of someone who'd learned that beauty could be created even in grief. For Mrs. Chen, he bought a nice tea set, small acknowledgement of the countless hours she'd spent caring for Ava without ever asking for payment. For Danny Chen, who'd remained a friend even after Marcus left construction, he bought a leather tool belt, professional grade, the kind that lasted decades. The purchases felt decadent and necessary in equal measure. Marcus had spent years denying himself anything beyond basic survival, and part of healing meant learning to accept that he could now afford small luxuries without guilt. Evelyn's holiday gathering was scheduled for December 18th at her penthouse, in one of the downtown towers Marcus had helped build foundations for years ago. The invitation had specified business casual, which Marcus interpreted as his best slacks and a button-down shirt Ava insisted he buy specifically for the occasion. You need to look successful, she'd said with 8-year-old authority while they shopped. Not like you're trying too hard, but like you belong there. When did you become a fashion consultant? Marcus had asked, amused. When my dad started going to fancy parties with important people. The evening of the gathering, Marcus dressed carefully while Ava watched from his bedroom doorway, offering commentary and approval in equal measure. He'd gotten a haircut the previous day, his first professional cut rather than the home trimming he'd been doing for years. The effect was subtle but noticeable. He looked polished, competent, like someone who might actually belong at a business gathering rather than someone desperately pretending. You look really handsome, Daddy, Ava said, her voice carrying the kind of serious assessment children brought to important observations. Thank you, sweetheart. You look pretty beautiful yourself. Ava had chosen a velvet dress Eleanor had bought her for Thanksgiving, dark blue with white trim, paired with the new shoes that still made Marcus irrationally happy every time he saw her wearing them. Her hair was pulled back in a style Mrs. Chen had helped her practice, making her look older than 8, though her excited bouncing betrayed her age. They drove downtown as the sun set, painting the city in shades of orange and purple that made even the concrete corridors look beautiful. The tower's lobby was lavish in ways Marcus remembered from construction but experienced differently now. He was entering through the front doors as a guest rather than through service entrances as a worker. The shift in perspective felt meaningful, though he couldn't quite articulate why. The elevator to Evelyn's penthouse required a key card the doorman provided after checking Marcus's name against a guest list. They rose 63 floors, Ava pressing her face against the glass walls to watch the city shrink beneath them. Daddy, we're so high up, she whispered, awed. Pretty amazing, isn't it? Did you help build this? I helped dig the foundations years ago, but mostly other people built the tall parts. The elevator opened directly into Evelyn's penthouse, a space so expansive Marcus momentarily forgot how to breathe. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of the city, holiday lights twinkling across the urban landscape like grounded stars. The interior was modern but warm, expensive furniture arranged for conversation, art on the walls that probably cost more than Marcus's annual salary, but nothing ostentatious or cold. 20 or so people mingled with cocktails and conversation, the kind of successful professionals who moved through these spaces with comfortable ease. Evelyn spotted them immediately, excusing herself from a conversation to approach with genuine warmth. She'd dressed elegantly, but not pretentiously, projecting competence and welcome in equal measure. Marcus, I'm so glad you came. She turned to Ava with a smile. And you must be Ava. Your card is still on my desk. The glitter hasn't stopped spreading. I find specks of it in the most unexpected places. Ava giggled, charmed. I like to use a lot of glitter. A woman after my own heart. Come, let me introduce you both to some people. The next hour passed in a blur of introductions and conversations. Evelyn moved them through the gathering with practiced skill, introducing Marcus to architects and developers, property managers and city planners, each person potentially valuable for his growing consulting practice. She framed him perfectly. Marcus brings unique perspective, having worked both in engineering and construction. He understands how to design things that can actually be built. Marcus found himself discussing structural challenges with people who owned buildings across the city, explaining load-bearing calculations to a developer planning a historic renovation, offering insight on foundation issues to an architect designing in the arts district. The conversations flowed naturally, his construction vocabulary translating engineering concepts in ways that resonated with people who spent money rather than calculated stress loads. Ava, meanwhile, had been adopted by Evelyn's assistant Maria, a woman in her 20s who seemed delighted to have a child to entertain. Marcus watched them across the room, Ava animated in conversation, her laughter carrying over adult voices, and felt something settle in his chest. His daughter was learning to move through these spaces too, developing social confidence he'd never had at her age. She's remarkable, Evelyn said quietly, appearing at Marcus's elbow with fresh drinks. Articulate, curious, empathetic, you've done an extraordinary job raising her. I've mostly just tried not to screw her up too badly, Marcus admitted. That's underselling it considerably. Evelyn gestured toward the windows where the city spread beneath them. I grew up in a family that had money, but no love. My childhood was private schools and etiquette lessons, and nobody asking how I felt about anything. Ava has love. She has a father who sacrificed his own prospects to keep her safe and cared for. That's worth more than any material advantage. Marcus studied Evelyn's profile, seeing something in her expression that suggested old pain carefully managed. Is that why you stopped when I helped with your car? Because you recognized something in me? Partly, but mostly I stopped because I was terrified, and you showed up offering help without expecting anything in return. Evelyn turned to face him fully. I've spent my entire adult life in business environments where every gesture has calculation behind it. People help because they want something. They're kind because there's advantage in kindness. And then there you were, risking something important to help a stranger, asking nothing in return. It was so rare it felt almost fictional. I'm not special, Marcus protested. Lots of people would have stopped. Maybe, but lots of people didn't. A dozen cars passed me before you stopped. And when I learned you'd missed your interview because of me, I felt responsible, but also curious. What kind of person makes that choice? What kind of character prioritizes immediate kindness over long-term strategy? Evelyn smiled slightly. Turns out the answer is exactly the kind of person I want working on my buildings. An older gentleman approached, silver-haired, expensive suit, the bearing of someone accustomed to authority. Evelyn made introductions. Marcus Reed, this is Thomas Hartwell. He owns Hartwell Properties, about 20 commercial buildings around the city. Marcus is the structural engineer I was telling you about. Thomas shook Marcus's hand with the assessing grip of someone who'd spent decades evaluating people. Evelyn speaks very highly of your abilities, says you can spot problems other engineers miss because you understand construction realities. I spent 4 years in construction, Marcus acknowledged. It taught me that beautiful designs don't matter if they're impossible to build properly. Practical wisdom. Thomas pulled out a business card. I've got a building in the industrial district that needs assessment before I can move forward with tenant improvements. Are you taking on additional projects? Marcus accepted the card, managing to keep his expression professional despite internal excitement. I'd be happy to discuss it. My primary employment is with Harlan Engineering, but I'm available for consulting work that doesn't conflict with their projects. Excellent. Call my office next week. We'll set something up. After Thomas departed, Evelyn leaned close. That's a $30 million renovation project. If you handle his assessment well, it'll lead to more work. Thomas has extensive holdings and talks to everyone who matters in commercial real estate. Marcus felt slightly dizzy. 6 months ago, he'd been hauling rebar. Now he was networking with people who made decisions involving millions of dollars, and they were treating him like a peer rather than an employee. The transformation felt so complete he sometimes forgot who he'd been. the desperation that had characterized his daily existence. Later in the evening, after Ava had fallen asleep on a couch under Maria's watchful care and the gathering had thinned to a handful of lingering guests, Marcus found himself alone with Evelyn on her balcony. The city spread beneath them, lights mapping human activity across the urban landscape, and the December air was cool but not uncomfortable. "Thank you," Marcus said quietly. "Not just for tonight, but for everything. For calling Jennifer Morrison, for the consulting work, for believing I was worth the effort. You were always worth the effort, Marcus. You just needed someone to see it." Evelyn gazed at the city below. "I told you my childhood was loveless. What I didn't mention is that I spent my 20s trying to earn my parents' approval through business success. Built my first million by 28. My father's response was to ask why it wasn't 10 million. My mother wanted to know when I'd stop being so masculine and find a husband." "I'm sorry. That sounds incredibly painful." "It was. Still is sometimes." Evelyn smiled sadly. "But it taught me that approval from people incapable of giving it freely is worthless. And it made me determined that when I had power, I'd use it to actually help people rather than just accumulate more power." "Is that what I am? A project to help?" "No," Evelyn said firmly. "You're a competent engineer who happened to help me when I needed it. The rest followed naturally. If you'd been incompetent, my recommendation wouldn't have mattered. Jennifer Morrison doesn't hire people as favors. She hired you because you demonstrated capability." Marcus wanted to believe that completely, but couldn't quite silence the small voice suggesting he'd been incredibly lucky. "I still can't believe how much my life has changed in 6 months." "Believe it. You earned it." Evelyn turned to face him directly. "Marcus, can I give you some advice? Stop qualifying your success. Stop waiting for it to be taken away. You're good at what you do. You work hard. You treat people with respect. Those qualities create their own momentum. This isn't charity or luck. It's the natural consequence of competence meeting opportunity." "My mother says similar things." "Your mother sounds wise. Listen to her. And listen to me. You're going to be fine. Better than fine. You're going to build a career that lets you provide for Ava, that gives you professional satisfaction, that proves everyone who believed in you wasn't wrong." Evelyn's voice softened. "And maybe someday you'll help some other desperate person who's standing on an empty road wondering if their life will ever get better. You'll remember what kindness felt like when you needed it, and you'll pay it forward." Marcus felt his eyes sting. "Thank you for everything. Thank yourself. I just opened a door. You walked through it and made yourself belong on the other side." They returned inside where Maria was gently waking Ava, who smiled sleepily at Marcus with complete trust and contentment. He gathered his daughter carefully, her arms wrapping around his neck, her weight familiar and precious. Evelyn walked them to the elevator, hugging them both before they departed. The drive home through late-night city streets felt meditative. Ava dozed in the passenger seat, occasionally murmuring dream-speak that made Marcus smile. He thought about the evening, the people he'd met, the opportunities potentially opening, the way Evelyn had framed his journey not as charity received but as competence recognized. Maybe she was right. Maybe he needed to stop seeing his success as temporary luck and start accepting it as earned. At home, Marcus carried Ava to bed without waking her, gently removing her shoes and covering her with blankets. He stood in her doorway for a long moment, watching her sleep, overcome with gratitude so profound it felt almost painful. 6 months ago, they'd been barely surviving, one crisis away from disaster. Now they had security, opportunity, hope for a future that extended beyond next month's rent payment. His phone buzzed with a text from Eleanor. "How was the party?" Marcus typed back. "Good, really good. Met people who might lead to more consulting work. Ava charmed everyone. Felt like we belonged there." Eleanor's response was immediate. "You do belong there. Stop being surprised by your own success and start enjoying it. Your father would be so proud, Marcus. I'm so proud. Now go to bed. You have work tomorrow." Marcus smiled, typed "Love you, Mom," and prepared for bed. Tomorrow, he'd return to Harland Engineering, continuing the work that had become both career and calling. Next week, he'd call Thomas Hartwell about the Industrial District assessment. In January, he'd begin Evelyn's consulting projects, building a reputation that extended beyond his primary employment. And through it all, he'd be present for Ava, helping with homework, attending school events, building the stable, loving home he'd fought so hard to create. Christmas arrived with Eleanor driving down to spend 3 days with them. They decorated a small tree Ava had insisted on buying with her own saved allowance money, stringing lights and hanging ornaments while holiday music played from Marcus's phone. Eleanor cooked dishes from Marcus's childhood, pot roast and mashed potatoes, green bean casserole, apple pie that filled the apartment with cinnamon warmth. On Christmas morning, Ava opened her presents with the kind of joy that made every sacrifice feel worthwhile. The star necklace brought tears to her eyes. She'd wanted it so badly, but never asked because she'd learned too well how to suppress desire in deference to necessity. She put it on immediately and refused to take it off, even for her bath that evening. "It's the most beautiful thing I've ever owned," she whispered to Marcus, her fingers touching the pendant constantly as though confirming its reality. "You deserve beautiful things," Marcus told her, pulling her close. "You deserve everything good this world has to offer." Eleanor watched them with an expression Marcus couldn't quite decipher. Happiness mixed with sadness, gratitude mixed with grief. Later, after Ava was asleep, she explained while they shared Christmas wine in the small kitchen. "You look like your father when you're with her, the same expression he'd get watching you sleep when you were little, like you couldn't believe something so perfect existed and you were responsible for keeping it safe." Eleanor's voice caught. "He'd be so proud of who you've become, Marcus. Not because of the job or the money, but because you chose love over everything else. You chose your wife when she was dying. You chose your daughter when survival would have been easier alone. You chose to help a stranger when it cost you something important. Those choices define who you are." "I just did what felt right," Marcus protested. "Exactly. Doing what feels right even when it's hard. That's character. That's what your father taught you by example, and what you're teaching Ava now." Eleanor reached across the table, taking his hand. "Stop minimizing your own goodness. Accept that you're exactly the man your father hoped you'd become." Marcus cried then, quietly, releasing years of accumulated doubt and fear and grief. Eleanor held his hand and let him cry, understanding that some emotions needed expression without commentary or solution. January brought new challenges and new growth. Marcus began Evelyn's consulting projects, spending weekends examining aging buildings and writing detailed reports about structural integrity, necessary reinforcements, renovation feasibility. The work was technically demanding but intellectually satisfying, combining his engineering knowledge with construction experience in ways that felt uniquely valuable. Thomas Hartwell's project proved even more significant than anticipated. The initial assessment led to additional consulting work, which led to Thomas introducing Marcus to other property owners facing similar challenges. By February, Marcus was fielding inquiries faster than he could accept them, his evenings and weekends filling with consulting work that paid extraordinary rates and built a professional reputation that extended well beyond Harland engineering. Jennifer Morrison called him into her office in early March, her expression serious enough that Marcus's first thought was he'd somehow violated company policy with his consulting work. "Marcus, sit down. I need to discuss something with you." Jennifer closed her office door, returning to her desk with professional gravity. "Your consulting work has been noticed. Several clients have specifically requested you for projects, and I've had 3 property owners ask if you're available for full-time private consultation." Marcus felt his stomach drop. "Am I in trouble?" "I've been careful not to take projects that conflict with Harland's work." "You're not in trouble," Jennifer assured him. "Actually, quite the opposite. The partners have asked me to discuss a promotion. We'd like to make you a senior associate with expanded responsibilities and corresponding compensation. You'd still work on Harland projects primarily, but you'd have more autonomy to take outside consultation, and we'd formally partner on larger projects where your unique skill set adds value." The office seemed to tilt slightly. "A promotion? I've only been here 7 months." 7 months during which you've proven yourself invaluable. You've spotted critical issues on 3 major projects that would have cost clients millions if they'd proceeded with original plans. You've improved our communication with contractors. You've brought in new business through your growing reputation." Jennifer smiled. You've earned this, Marcus. The timeline might seem fast, but the results justify it. What kind of compensation are we discussing? 72,000 base salary plus profit sharing on projects you lead or consult on. Effectively, you'd be making close to six figures once we factor in your consulting work. And we'd provide support, an assistant to help manage your schedule, priority access to firm resources for your outside projects, formal partnership that benefits both you and Harland. Marcus couldn't speak. 6 months ago, he'd been making $35,000 hauling rebar. Now he was being offered nearly triple that, plus profit sharing, plus support for consulting work that was itself generating substantial income. The numbers felt abstract, disconnected from any reality he'd previously inhabited. "Can I have some time to think about this?" he managed. "Take the weekend. But Marcus, for what it's worth, I think you'd be foolish to decline. You're building something significant. This promotion just formalizes and supports what's already happening." Marcus drove home in a daze, his mind cycling through implications and possibilities. $72,000, six figures with consulting income, enough money that he could move Ava to a better apartment, maybe even start thinking about buying a small house. Enough security that one emergency wouldn't destroy everything they'd built. Enough success that he could finally, completely stop living in survival mode and start planning an actual future. He told Ava that evening, watching her face light up with pride so pure it hurt to witness. "Does this mean we can get a dog?" she asked immediately. Marcus laughed, pulling her into a hug. "Maybe. Let's see about a house first. A dog needs a yard." "We could have a house? With a yard? And a dog?" "Maybe, sweetheart. If I take this promotion and keep doing well with consulting work, yeah, we could probably afford a small house in a year or two." Ava burst into tears, happy tears, relief tears, the kind that came from years of uncertainty, finally resolving into security. Marcus held her while she cried, his own eyes stinging with sympathetic emotion. They'd made it. Against odds that had seemed insurmountable, through losses that could have destroyed them, they'd actually made it to the other side. That weekend, Marcus called Eleanor to discuss the promotion. His mother listened carefully, then responded with characteristic directness. "Take it. Obviously take it. Why are you even hesitating?" "Because 7 months ago I was in construction. Now I'm being offered close to six figures. It feels too fast, like I'm missing something." "What you're missing is that you're good at what you do and people recognize it. Stop questioning success and start accepting it." Eleanor's voice softened. "Marcus, you spent 4 years punishing yourself for choices that weren't mistakes. You chose to care for Sarah. You chose to raise Ava alone. You chose to stop and help Evelyn. Those weren't errors. They were expressions of who you are. And who you are is someone who deserves good things. Accept the promotion, buy the house, get Ava the dog. Live the life you've earned instead of constantly waiting for it to be taken away." "When did you get so wise?" "I've always been wise. You were just too stubborn to listen." Marcus accepted this promotion Monday morning, shaking hands with Jennifer and signing paperwork that made him a senior associate at Harlan Engineering. The announcement went out to staff that afternoon, and the congratulations flowed from colleagues who'd watched him grow from uncertain new hire to respected professional in less than a year. That evening, he received a text from Evelyn. "Heard about the promotion. Knew you'd rise fast. Congratulations. You've earned everything good that's happening." Marcus typed back, "None of this would have happened if you hadn't been stranded on that road." Evelyn's response came quickly. "Wrong. All of this would have happened eventually because you're talented and hardworking. I just accelerated the timeline. Stop giving me credit for your own capabilities." Marcus smiled, saving the message. Maybe she was right. Maybe he needed to start accepting that his success was earned rather than lucky, that competence and character had value the world occasionally recognized and rewarded. Spring arrived with unseasonable warmth and the kind of hope that felt sustainable rather than fragile. Marcus and Ava started house hunting on weekends, visiting small homes in neighborhoods with good schools and parks where children played without adult supervision, suggesting safety. They found a 3-bedroom bungalow in a tree-lined neighborhood 40 minutes from downtown. Nothing fancy, but clean and structurally sound, with a small backyard that Ava immediately designated as future dog territory. The mortgage application process terrified Marcus more than any engineering challenge. Exposing his financial history meant revealing the years of barely surviving, the medical debt he'd finally paid off, the gaps in employment that screamed instability. But his current income and employment history carried sufficient weight that the bank approved him for a loan that would have seemed impossible a year earlier. They closed on the house in May, Eleanor driving down to help with the move and crying when she saw Ava's bedroom, larger than their entire previous apartment, with windows that let in actual sunlight and closets that held more than 3 days of clothes. "You did it," Eleanor whispered to Marcus while Ava explored the backyard, already planning where the doghouse would go. "You actually did it." "We did it," Marcus corrected. "Couldn't have survived without you." "You would have found a way. You always do." Eleanor hugged him tightly. "But I'm glad I could help. I'm glad I got to witness this." In June, true to his promise, Marcus took Ava to an animal shelter where they found a medium-sized mutt with soulful eyes and a tail that wagged with desperate hope. Ava named her Hope immediately, recognizing something in the dog's expression that mirrored their own journey. The tentative belief that maybe, finally, things would be okay. July brought record heat in Marcus's first major solo project, a historic building renovation requiring extensive structural assessment and reinforcement planning. He worked closely with architects and contractors, his dual perspective allowing him to design solutions that were both engineering sound and practically buildable. The project's success led to 2 more significant consultations, and Marcus found himself genuinely excited about work for the first time since his technical school days before Sarah's illness had derailed everything. On a Saturday in early August, exactly 1 year after he'd stopped to help Evelyn, Marcus woke in his own house, in a bedroom with space for actual furniture, listening to Ava and Hope playing in the backyard. Sunlight streamed through windows he could afford to replace if they broke. The mortgage payment would post Monday, and he wouldn't have to calculate whether paying it meant sacrificing something else. His Civic sat in the driveway, recently replaced with a reliable used sedan because he could finally afford car payments without anxiety. He made coffee in a kitchen large enough to actually cook in, reviewing the project proposal he'd been preparing for a client meeting Monday. Senior associate at Harland Engineering, growing consulting practice, 6-figure income, savings account with an actual buffer, health insurance that covered things, dental appointments Ava actually attended, piano lessons and art supplies, and the small luxuries that made life feel like living rather than just surviving. His phone buzzed with a text from Evelyn. "Can't believe it's been a year since you saved me on that road. Coffee next week to celebrate?" Marcus typed back, "You saved me, actually. But yes to coffee. Name the day." Evelyn's response was immediate. "Wrong. We saved each other. That's how kindness works." Ava appeared in the kitchen doorway, Hope at her heels, both of them bringing in the smell of grass and summer and uncomplicated joy. "Daddy, can we go to the ocean today? You promised when things got better we'd go to the ocean." Marcus looked at his daughter, healthy, confident, wearing the star necklace she never removed, her face open with the kind of trust only children could maintain. A year ago, he'd been terrified every day that he'd fail her, that his inability to provide would damage her beyond repair. Now she was thriving, and he was finally keeping the promises he'd made. "Pack a bag," Marcus said, making the decision in the moment. "Let's go to the ocean." They drove 3 hours to the coast, windows down, music playing, Hope's head out the window in ecstatic, windswept joy. Ava talked nonstop about school and friends and piano recitals, and all the mundane, beautiful things children discussed when they felt safe enough to care about normal life rather than constant crisis. The ocean was exactly as Sarah had described it in her stories, vast and blue and endless, waves rolling in with rhythmic certainty, the salt smell mixing with sunscreen in summer. Marcus and Ava walked the beach while Hope chased waves with puppy enthusiasm, and Marcus felt something settle in his chest that had been unsettled for 6 years. "Mom was right," Ava said quietly, standing where waves met sand, her small feet disappearing into foam. "It's beautiful here." "She would have loved seeing you here," Marcus agreed, his throat tight. "She does see me. I know she does." Ava turned to face him, her expression serious beyond her years. "And I think she's proud of us, for not giving up, for choosing to be happy even though we miss her." Marcus pulled his daughter close, both of them standing in the ocean's edge while the world continued around them. Other families, other stories, other people facing their own impossible choices and surviving them. "I think she's proud too," he whispered into Ava's hair. "And I think she knows we'll be okay now." "We're more than okay, Daddy. We're actually happy." She was right. They were happy. Not in spite of everything they'd survived, but because of it. The struggles had taught them resilience, the losses had taught them gratitude. The years of barely surviving had taught them to recognize stability as the gift it was. And a single choice on an empty road, a choice to help a stranger when helping cost something important, had somehow unlocked a future Marcus had stopped believing existed. That evening, driving home with Ava asleep in the back seat and Hope curled beside her, Marcus thought about that morning 1 year ago when he'd seen Evelyn's Mercedes on the shoulder. He'd known stopping might cost him everything. He'd stopped anyway because it was right, because someone needed help, because his father had taught him. That character mattered more than convenience. He'd lost the interview. He'd thought he'd destroyed his last chance at changing their lives. But in losing that specific opportunity, he'd gained something more valuable. He'd proven to someone with power and resources that competence and character existed in the same person. Evelyn had recognized it, had acted on it, had opened doors Marcus hadn't even known existed. But more than that, Marcus had learned something essential, that choices made from kindness rarely resulted in the disasters he'd feared. That doing the right thing, even when it cost something precious, often led to outcomes better than he could have imagined. That the universe occasionally rewarded people for choosing integrity over expedience. Not because the universe was fair or just, but because integrity attracted people who valued it and wanted to support it. His phone buzzed with a text from Eleanor. "Thought about you today. 1 year since everything changed, proud of how far you've come." Marcus pulled over to respond properly. 1 year since I chose to help a stranger. Best decision I never planned to make." Eleanor's response was immediate. "Your father taught you well. Now you're teaching Ava the same lessons. That's how goodness continues." Marcus looked back at his sleeping daughter, her hand resting on Hope's fur, both of them peaceful in the way only the truly secure could be. He'd taught her that helping people mattered more than being on time. He'd taught her that character wasn't something you chose when it was convenient, but something you chose especially when it was hard. He taught her that survival was temporary, but integrity was permanent. And she taught him something equally valuable, that believing in people, in their potential, in their goodness, in their capacity for growth, sometimes made belief become reality. Ava had believed he'd get the job when he'd stopped believing in anything. She'd been right. She'd always been right. Marcus started the car and continued the drive home, toward the house they owned, toward the life they'd built from ruins and hope and a single act of roadside kindness. Tomorrow he'd return to work he loved. Next week he'd meet with clients who valued his expertise. Next month he'd cash consulting checks that represented security rather than survival. But tonight, he was just a father driving his daughter home after a day at the ocean, fulfilling a promise he'd made when promises felt like lies. They were going to be okay. More than okay. They were going to be happy and secure and hopeful. Living proof that sometimes choosing kindness over convenience didn't cost you everything. It led you exactly where you'd always belonged. And somewhere in a downtown penthouse, Evelyn Cross received his message and smiled, remembering a morning when a stranger had stopped to help her, and never knowing that in doing so, he'd helped himself more than either of them could have predicted. Because that's how kindness worked when it was real. It didn't cost everything. It invested in futures neither person could see, and those investments occasionally paid dividends that changed everything. 1 year later, Marcus Reed had learned the most important lesson. That character wasn't what you kept when everything went right, but what you refused to compromise when everything went wrong. And that lesson, more than any job or house or financial security, was what would carry him and Ava forward into whatever future waited beyond today. They were going to be fine. They already were.